Hello there, and welcome to History for Lunatics. I am so glad you're here tonight. Pull up something comfortable if you can. Maybe you're listening from bed, maybe from a chair beside a window, maybe from a quiet room where the day has finally stopped asking things from you. Wherever you are, I want you to take a slow breath for a moment, because tonight we are going somewhere that looks ordinary at first. Not to a battlefield in France, not to a map room where generals move pins across Europe, not to a cockpit over the Channel or a cabinet office under Westminster. We're going down a flight of steps in London during the Second World War, into a place where ordinary people waited while the city above them shook. Tonight, we are stepping inside a bomb shelter during an air raid in London. Not the kind of shelter you see in a museum after it has been cleaned, labelled, and made safe for school groups. Not the kind shown in a film where everyone seems strangely tidy and brave in the same direction. I mean the real thing. A crowded, damp, badly lit shelter in a city under attack, with mothers carrying blankets, children holding mugs, elderly men trying not to show fear, wardens calling instructions, and strangers sitting close enough to hear each other breathe. And here is the thing that I think changes how you understand the London Blitz the moment you really let it in. The shelter was not just a place people went to avoid bombs. It became a second version of the city. A city beneath the city. Smaller, darker, more crowded, and more honest than the London above it. Down there, class mattered less than it had at breakfast. Privacy almost disappeared. Sleep became public. Fear became communal. The sound of a baby crying could annoy a dozen people and comfort them at the same time, because a crying baby meant there was still life in the room. A cup of tea, if someone managed to bring one, became almost a civic institution, and every person underground was listening for the same thing, not the explosion itself, exactly, but the distance of it, near or far, street away or city away, yours or someone else's. That was the calculation everyone made in the dark, again and again until morning. Before we go any further, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Are you somewhere quiet with a lamp on, with the soft modern comfort of knowing that if the lights go out, it is probably only a power cut, and someone somewhere will fix it? Because that certainty is one of the great luxuries of modern life. We switch on a light and expect the room to obey. We hear an aircraft overhead and usually do not look up. We sleep through the night assuming the ceiling above us will still be there in the morning. For Londoners in 1940 and 1941, those assumptions had been taken away piece by piece. The sky itself had become something to monitor. Nightfall had changed from the end of the day into the opening of a danger, and a sound as basic as a siren could turn thousands of private lives into one shared movement towards shelter. If this kind of storytelling speaks to you, if you enjoy history told slowly, with the small details left in and the ordinary people placed back at the centre of the story, it would mean a great deal if you subscribed and gave this video a like. You do not have to do it right now. Do it when something in the story makes you stop and think for a second. And if you want to tell me where you are listening from, your city, your country, your little corner of the world tonight, I genuinely love reading those comments. There is something fitting about that for this story, because the people we're about to meet were strangers pressed together in the dark, and sometimes the first thing that made them less strange was simply knowing where the person beside them came from. Now let us go back. Not vaguely back, not into a soft black and white version of wartime Britain, but to London in the autumn of 1940. The war has been going on for a year. Poland has been invaded. France has fallen. British soldiers have been evacuated from Dunkirk. The Battle of Britain has filled the summer sky with aircraft and smoke trails, and the people of London have been told for months to prepare for bombing. They have been issued gas masks in cardboard boxes. They have practiced blackout routines. They have taped windows, carried identity cards, learnt the difference between an alert and an all clear, and watched air raid precautions wardens become a familiar part of the street. Some families have Anderson shelters in their gardens. Those curved corrugated steel structures designed before the war to be partly buried under earth. They could offer protection from blast and flying fragments, but they were often cold and damp, and in wet weather they could feel less like safety and more like being asked to spend the night in a hole lined with metal. The Anderson shelter had been designed in 1938 and was meant for use in gardens, with earth piled over it for extra protection, though dampness was a constant problem for many households. Other people do not have gardens at all. They live in flats, lodging houses, crowded terraces, rooms above shops, or narrow streets where the backyard, if there is one, is barely large enough for a coal bin and a washing line. Some will later receive Morrison shelters, indoor steel table shelters introduced from 1941, made as a rectangular cage that could fit 2 adults and 2 children, and could even serve as a dining table in the daytime. But on the night we are entering now, that is still ahead for many people. For thousands of Londoners, the realistic choice is not between comfort and discomfort. It is between bad shelter and no shelter. Between the cellar beneath a shop, the basement of a public building, a trench shelter, a railway arch, a church crypt, an underground station, or the cupboard under the stairs if there is truly nowhere else to go. Picture a woman in East London, because East London is where so much of this story gathers its weight. She might live in Stepney, Poplar, Bethnal Green, Bermondsey, or the East End streets close to the docks, where warehouses, wharves, factories, railway lines and crowded housing site dangerously close together. The docks are targets because they matter to the war. Ships, fuel, food, timber, sugar, tea, machinery, all the things that keep an island nation supplied, move through those places, but bombs do not respect the neat categories printed on military maps. A bomb aimed at a dock can land in a street. A bomb aimed at a railway line can open a row of houses. A bomb that misses its target can still find a family at supper. That is one of the coldest truths of the Blitz. The official target might be strategic, but the experience on the ground was intimate. It was doors blown inward. It was plaster in the hair. It was a saucepan found in the road. It was a person standing in slippers outside what had been their house 5 minutes earlier. So this woman, let us place her in a small rented home, is not thinking about strategy when the evening begins. She's thinking about whether the children have eaten enough to last the night if they are stuck underground. She's thinking about the blankets. She's thinking about the gas masks. She's thinking about whether the little one will need the lavatory the moment they reach the shelter, because children have a gift for choosing the least convenient moment to announce a bodily emergency, and war did not change that. That is one of the things I want us to keep close tonight. The Blitz was enormous, but it was lived through in small, inconvenient human details. The evening has its own routine now. The blackout is already part of life. Windows must be covered so that no light escapes and helps enemy bombers identify the city below. This was not a polite suggestion. It was enforced. A careless slit of light at a curtain could bring a knock from the warden and a sharp reminder. The blackout changed the physical experience of London. Streets that had once glowed with shop fronts, lamps, buses and theatre signs became dark and hazardous. Curbs disappeared. People walked into posts. Traffic moved differently. The city had to pretend not to exist from the air, and every household was required to participate in that pretending. Inside the house, the family has already learned to keep certain things together. Gas masks near the door, coats easy to reach, a torch if the batteries are not dead, a small parcel of food, perhaps sandwiches wrapped in paper, perhaps a bottle of milk for the youngest child, perhaps a tin mug because tea could sometimes be found if the shelter had a canteen or if someone brought a flask. A blanket matters more than almost anything. Not a decorative blanket, not something chosen for a room, but a rough practical thing that can be wrapped around a child on a platform or spread over a bench or folded under an old woman's hips on a concrete floor. People learned quickly what the official instructions could not fully teach. A shelter night was not only about surviving blast, it was about enduring hours. Hours are heavy when you are cold. Hours are heavier when you are frightened. A blanket is not a small thing in that situation. It is warmth, privacy, bedding, comfort, and sometimes the only boundary between your family and everyone else's needs. Now, before the siren sounds, there is a strange period of waiting. This is something that people who lived through raids described in different ways, but the pattern is easy to understand if you have ever waited for bad news you knew might come. The day appears normal, or at least as normal as wartime can be. Shops open, buses run, work continues. Children play in streets where gaps have already appeared between buildings. Women queue for food. Men come home tired. Somewhere a wireless plays, somewhere a kettle boils. The city acts as if it is not afraid, because cities are very good at performing normality until they cannot. But as the light lowers, attention shifts upward. People know that bombers usually come at night. Not always, but often enough that darkness itself has become a warning, and so the evening is divided in the mind. Before the siren and after the siren. Before the movement and after the movement. Before you still belong to your own room and after you become part of the underground crowd. That threshold is what we are approaching. It is not dramatic yet. No explosion. No screaming. Just a London evening turning black under blackout curtains, and a family making small preparations while trying not to make the youngest child more frightened than she already is. The shelter itself might be several different things, and this matters because the word shelter can mislead us. It sounds singular, as if Britain built one kind of safe place and people simply went into it. The reality was much messier. An Anderson shelter in a garden was different from a basement shelter beneath a block of flats. A public shelter beneath a school was different from a tube platform. A railway arch was different from a church crypt. Some shelters were organised, with wardens, bunks, first aid points and rules. Others were improvised, overcrowded, badly ventilated and trusted mainly because they were below street level. The underground stations became especially important because they were deep, familiar, and already part of the city's daily geography. At first, the government was cautious about allowing mass sheltering in the tube, partly because officials worried about disease, panic, interference with transport, and people refusing to leave in the morning. But when the raids intensified, people went there anyway. Thousands flocked to the underground for protection, and policy had to change as deep-level stations became dual-purpose spaces for both transport and shelter. That is such an important point. The tube was not handed to Londoners as a perfect prepared sanctuary. Londoners pushed their way into using it as one. Safety, in this case, was not simply provided from above. It was demanded from below, sometimes literally. Let us imagine that tonight our family is going to a public shelter near an underground station, not necessarily one of the grand central stations whose names are famous, but a working station in a working district where the platform has become a nighttime dormitory. They have done this before. That changes everything. The first raid is terror mixed with confusion. The 10th raid has routine wrapped around terror. The mother knows which child carries what. The older boy takes the rolled blanket. The younger girl holds the tin with sandwiches. The smallest child is half awake already, sensing from the adult's movements that the night is not going to remain ordinary. The father, if he is home and not on duty as a warden, firefighter, soldier, factory worker or night shift labourer, checks the door, checks the gas mask boxes, and says something practical because practical speech is often how fear disguises itself. Do not forget your scarf. Mind the step. Keep hold of your sister. Those are the sentences people say when what they mean is, please let us all be alive in the morning. Then the siren begins. It is not a sound designed for comfort. It rises and falls across the city with that long, mechanical wail that seems to come from everywhere at once. The first time you hear it, it must have felt unreal, almost theatrical, because people had been imagining the sound long before it became part of nightly life. But by the Blitz, it had become a command written in noise. Stop what you're doing, move, take cover. The siren did not tell you where the bombers were. It did not tell you how many. It did not tell you whether your street would still exist when the all-clear sounded. It simply changed the status of the night. A few moments earlier, you were a family in a room. Now you were civilians under air attack. There is a bureaucratic coldness to that phrase, civilians under air attack, but inside it are thousands of little domestic ruptures. A kettle left unpoured, a bed left warm, a half-darned sock abandoned in a lap, a baby lifted too quickly and startled into tears, a front door pulled shut by someone who does not know whether they will open it again. The street outside is dark because of the blackout, but it is not empty. This is one of the details that matters. A raid did not isolate people at first, it brought them out. Doors opened along the row. Shapes emerged carrying bundles. A man with a limp moved carefully. A woman called back into her house for a child who had forgotten a gas mask. Someone cursed because a strap had broken. Someone laughed too loudly, not because anything was funny, but because laughter sometimes arrives when dignity needs help. The warden's voice cut through it. Put that light out. Keep moving. This way. No pushing. The air raid precautions wardens were not glamorous figures in most ordinary moments. They checked blackout compliance, guided people, reported damage, dealt with gas precautions, and often absorbed the irritation of tired civilians who did not enjoy being told what to do. But during a raid, a good warden could become the thread that kept a street from unravelling. People needed someone to sound certain, even if certainty was partly an act. And now we're close to the shelter door, or the station entrance, or the stairs leading down. I want you to stay there for a moment before we descend, because the entrance itself is one of the most important places in this whole story. A shelter entrance during an air raid was not only a doorway, it was a compression point. All the private fear of the surrounding streets narrowed there. People arrived carrying blankets, bags, prams, pets they were not supposed to bring, sleeping children, old grievances, class habits, neighbourhood loyalties, and the exhausted politeness of people who knew they might have to sit beside one another until dawn. The entrance forced decisions. Who goes first? Who needs help? Who is taking too long? Who has brought too much? Who is pretending not to panic? We know from later wartime disasters, especially the terrible crush at Bethnal Green Underground Station in March 1943, where 173 people died while entering a public shelter, that the act of getting underground could itself become dangerous when fear, darkness, crowding, and sudden noise converged. That tragedy comes later than the autumn night we're entering now, but it reminds us of something essential. Shelter was not a magic word. A shelter could save you, but reaching it required order, light, space, and luck. Without those, even the promise of safety could become a hazard. Tonight, though, the crowd moves. Slowly, unevenly, but it moves. Down the steps, away from the street, away from the sky. That is the physical logic of every shelter in the Blitz. You go lower because danger is above. You trust earth, brick, concrete, iron, tunnel, and depth. You trust whatever has been placed between your body and the open air. As they begin to descend, the sounds change. This is one of the simplest ways to understand the psychological shift. At street level, the siren spreads wide. Voices bounce between houses. Somewhere in the distance there may already be the faint thud of guns, but on the stairs, sound tightens. Footsteps, breathing, the scrape of a suitcase, a child asking if they are nearly there, the hollow echo of bodies going underground. The smell changes too. London above smells of coal smoke, damp pavement, brick dust, river air, horse traces still lingering in some streets, petrol, cooking, and blackout cloth warmed by rooms behind windows. London below smells different. Damp concrete, metal rails, old dust, wet wool. People who came in from work and have not washed because there was no time. Soap, tobacco, milk, fear. Fear has no official smell, of course, but anyone who has been in a crowded room during a crisis knows that bodies tell the truth even when mouths do not. At the bottom, the shelter opens around them. Perhaps it is a platform with people already settled along the wall. Perhaps bunks have been installed, though not enough for everyone. Perhaps there are chalked signs, wardens, first aid supplies, buckets, chemical toilets, and a canteen that will later produce tea so strong and sweet it tastes like civilization. In some underground stations, official arrangements did improve as the war went on, with bunks, canteens, first aid facilities, and chemical toilets supplied after the authorities accepted that mass sheltering was not a temporary nuisance, but a nightly reality. But even with improvements, there was no way to make thousands of frightened people underground truly comfortable. Comfort was not the aim. Survival was the aim. Endurance was the aim. A place to sit was a victory. A dry place was a luxury. A familiar face was medicine. Look around the shelter now, not quickly. Let your eyes adjust. There are families who clearly came early and claimed their regular places. This happened. People became territorial underground, because when everything else was uncertain, a few feet of platform could begin to feel like property. There are bundles along the wall, blankets spread, pillows from home, newspapers folded under hips, prams tucked awkwardly out of the way. Some people are still wearing hats because taking off a hat somehow suggests you have settled, and not everyone is ready to admit that. Children are already making a world out of the floor because children will do that almost anywhere. A boy runs a toy car along the edge of a bench until his mother tells him to stop making that noise. Two girls whisper under a blanket. An older woman removes her shoes with the seriousness of someone preparing for a long journey. A man opens a newspaper, though whether he can read it in this light is another matter. On the wall, an advertisement from peacetime may still be visible, promising a product, a holiday, a theatre show, a kind of ordinary future that now feels almost rude in its cheerfulness. This is where the story truly begins, not with the bomb, but with the waiting. Waiting is the main activity of a shelter. People imagine the Blitz as explosions, fire, collapse, rescue, and ruins, and of course it was all of those things. But for the people underground, much of it was waiting in a place where there was not enough air, not enough room, not enough certainty, and far too much time to think. The bombs are still above us for the moment. The aircraft are still approaching or passing, or being tracked somewhere by people with maps and instruments and headphones. The guns have not yet become the loudest thing in the night. Down here, a family is arranging itself on a bench. A mother is tucking a blanket around a child's legs. A father is trying to judge whether the wall behind him feels strong. The warden is telling people to move further along and make room. Someone is complaining. Someone is praying so quietly that only the person beside them can hear it. Someone has already closed their eyes, not because they are calm, but because keeping them open is too much work. And above them, London holds its breath in the dark while the first distant engines begin to gather in the sky. The first thing most people remember is the sound. Not the first bomb, not the first gun, not even the first aircraft overhead, but the siren. It did not belong to one street or one building. It seemed to arrive everywhere at once, rising over chimneys, sliding between blackout curtains, carrying across the river, finding people in kitchens, shops, pubs, factories, bedrooms, tram stops, and narrow hallways where coats already hung waiting on hooks. The air raid warning had a particular shape to it, a rising and falling wail that told the body what the mind might still be trying to deny. It meant the night had changed. It meant the sky was no longer just sky. It meant that every small private thing happening in that moment had to be interrupted and reorganized around survival. A woman lifting a pan from the stove stopped with the handle still in her cloth. A child halfway through a sentence forgot what he was saying. A man shaving at the sink wiped soap from one side of his face and left the other side white. Someone had just poured tea. Someone had just taken off their boots. Someone had finally sat down after 12 hours of work and now had to stand again. That was one of the quiet cruelties of the Blitz. It did not only threaten life, it broke into life constantly, at the exact moments when ordinary people were trying to claim the smallest comforts of being at home. The British government had prepared for air raids before the war began, with the Air Raid Warden Service created in 1937 and more than 44 million gas masks distributed by September 1939. But preparation on paper and preparation in the nerves were two very different things. By the autumn of 1940, Londoners knew what the siren meant, but knowing did not make it gentle. The sound still entered the room like a hand on the shoulder. Get up, move, do not argue with the night. The family we are following has heard it before. That matters. The first warning of the war had carried a strange confusion with it, because everyone had been told for years that the bombs would come, and then for months there had been alarms, rumours, waiting and dread without the full weight of what people had imagined. But once the sustained bombing began, once London had been hit and hit again, the siren became part of the city's nightly grammar. The Blitz began on September the 7th, 1940, when German bombers attacked London, and the city was then bombed for 57 consecutive nights. Think about that as a lived routine rather than a statistic. 57 nights is enough time for terror to develop habits, enough time for families to learn which child panics first, which neighbour needs help with the stairs, which torch flickers, which shelter smells the worst, which warden is kind, which one shouts too soon, which corner of the platform catches the draft, and which route is fastest when the street is dark. The mother does not need a speech from the government now. She needs shoes on the youngest child. She needs the gas mask boxes. She needs the blanket that was folded by the door because last time the bench was cold enough to make the little girl cry. The father, if he is home, reaches automatically for the small things that have become shelter things. A torch, a packet of cigarettes, a tin of biscuits, if there are any, identity cards, a scarf, perhaps a thermos, though many people did not have one, and many who had one did not always have time to fill it. There is a whole domestic skill in leaving quickly without looking as if you were fleeing. People do not like to feel chased from their own homes, even when the siren says exactly that. Some part of the person resists, so they call it going down. They call it taking shelter. They call it being sensible. They do not call it running from bombs, though that is what it is. The blackout has already swallowed the street. This is important because the last minutes before shelter were not brightly lit minutes. They were not cinematic scenes with lamps glowing and neighbours waving from open doors. Since the start of the war, Britain had lived under blackout rules intended to prevent enemy aircraft from using artificial light to identify towns, roads, rivers, docks, factories and houses from above. Wardens had the job of enforcing that darkness, making sure light did not leak from windows, shops, factories or careless doors. Curtains had to be thick, gaps had to be covered, shops fitted blinds, street lamps were dimmed or switched off, car headlights were reduced to slits. White paint appeared on curbstones, tree trunks, posts, and the edges of obstacles because people still needed to move through the city, and the city had become difficult to see. That is a detail worth staying with for a moment. The blackout protected London from being seen by enemy crews, but it also made London dangerous to its own people. You could trip on a curb you had stepped over for 20 years. You could walk into a lamppost. You could lose a child in a crowd because faces dissolved into dark shapes. In peacetime, light made the city open. In wartime, darkness became a form of defence, and every civilian had to live inside the inconvenience of that defence. Inside the house, the blackout curtains turned the rooms into boxes. The family may have one shaded lamp burning, or a small fire, or just enough light to find straps and buttons. No one wants to open the door too wide and spill brightness. Into the street. The warden will see it. A neighbour will see it. More importantly, the aircraft might see it. At least that is what everyone has been taught to believe, and in wartime a rule repeated often enough becomes part of the conscience. The mother checks the children's gas masks. even if the fear of gas has faded somewhat from the first months of the war. The government had expected that poison gas might be used against civilians, which is why gas masks had been issued so widely before the war. But the practical reality for many families was that the cardboard box with its string became a constant nuisance, a symbol of danger carried by children to school, to shops, to shelter, to bed. Children disliked them. The rubber smelled strange. The mask made the face look insect-like. Very small children had special protective equipment that could be even more frightening to look at. But not bringing the mask felt irresponsible. So the boxes came. They knocked against knees. They were forgotten and fetched again. The string cut into shoulders. A child might swing his box until told sharply to stop it. These are the small frictions of a society trying to make fear portable. There is no real time to debate what to take. That decision was supposed to have been made earlier, in the calm hours, but calm hours are when people are most tempted to pretend the next alarm will not come. A good shelter bundle might include a blanket, ration books, identity cards, a little food, something to drink, spare clothes for a baby, a torch, matches, perhaps a book, perhaps knitting, perhaps a toy, because a child with empty hands can become a problem in a crowded shelter long before the bombs arrive. But every item adds weight. Every extra parcel slows you down. Every hand carrying something is a hand not holding a child or steadying an older person on the stairs. That is the arithmetic of those last minutes. Comfort against speed, preparedness against panic, pride against need. Some people brought too much because they were afraid of being trapped for hours with nothing. Some brought almost nothing because they refused to make the shelter feel permanent. A few had already made the emotional move that many authorities feared. They had accepted the shelter as their nighttime home and arrived with bedding as if reporting to a second bedroom. This especially became true in underground stations, where, after the early raids, Londoners used tube platforms in huge numbers as places of refuge, forcing official policy to adjust to what the public was already doing. The youngest child does not understand policy. She understands that the adults are moving too quickly. She understands that the siren means coats in the dark and cold fingers at her collar. She understands that the shelter smells bad and that she will not be in her own bed. Childhood during the Blitz was full of instructions that adults expected children to obey without fully explaining the fear behind them. Do not stand near the window. Do not forget your mask. Do not dawdle. Do not cry. Or if you must cry, do it quietly. Hold your brother's hand. Stay with me. The older children understand more than the adults want them to. They know which streets were hit last week. They have seen broken glass swept into piles. They have collected shrapnel like treasure, because children have always turned danger into objects they can hold. They may have cheered at anti-aircraft fire before realising that cheering does not stop bombs. They know that school can continue after a raid, that a teacher can take attendance while one desk remains empty, and that adults sometimes say brave things with faces that are not brave. So when the siren sounds, the older boy may feel important because he is given the blanket or told to help his sister. But underneath the importance there is fear, and underneath the fear there may be a thin line of excitement that makes him ashamed of himself. Air raids were terrifying, but they were also events, and children, especially, could experience danger and adventure so closely together that the memory became complicated for the rest of their lives. Outside, doors open along the street. The blackout makes everyone less distinct. People become outlines first, voices second, names only when they come close. There is Mrs. Harris from 2 doors down, carrying a shopping bag with a pillow sticking out of it. There is old Mr. Clark, who says every time that he is not going to spend another night underground, and every time ends up going anyway because his daughter insists. There is a young woman with curlers under a scarf, annoyed to be seen like that, as if German bombers had committed the additional offence of arriving before she was ready. There is a man who jokes that Hitler might at least choose a reasonable hour, and people laugh because refusing the joke would make the fear too visible. The humour of the Blitz was not always noble. Sometimes it was sharp, tired, rude, impatient, and practical. People joked about bombs because the alternative was to stand in the street naming the thing they dreaded. The official image of London endurance often presents courage as clean and cheerful, but real endurance usually has mud on it. It grumbles, it complains, it says, "Not again," while already tying the child's scarf. The warden moves along the pavement with a helmet, armband, respirator bag, whistle, and torch carefully shaded. Wardens were responsible for far more than telling people to put lights out. They advised on precautions, enforced blackout rules, reported bomb damage, helped coordinate emergency services, and during raids could find themselves guiding, rescuing, calming, arguing, and making decisions in streets that had become unstable. But in this moment, before the bombs are close, much of the work is crowd management. Keep moving. No lights. Mind the curb. You cannot bring that trunk. The shelter is filling. Make room for the elderly. These are ordinary sentences until you imagine saying them while aircraft approach. The warden has to sound as if the system is working. That is part of the job. Even if he knows the shelter is overcrowded, even if he knows the last raid blocked the next street, even if he has not slept properly in days, he must become a public voice of order. Civil defence depends on equipment, yes, but it also depends on tone. A frightened crowd listens for tone. If the official voice shakes, the crowd feels permission to shake with it. The family begins to walk. Not far, perhaps. A shelter close by, a tube station entrance several streets away, a basement beneath a school, a trench shelter in a public space, or the underground if they are among those who use it regularly. Distance feels different under warning. A 5-minute walk becomes a procession through risk. Every delay matters. A shoelace coming loose matters. A child dropping a toy matters. A neighbour blocking the pavement matters. And the darkness makes the familiar street slightly foreign. The shop at the corner is still there, but its sign is invisible. The pub door opens and closes with only a thin, dull glow escaping before someone pulls the curtain back into place. A bus may pass slowly, mast lights low, moving like a large, cautious animal. Bicycles appear suddenly. People mutter apologies after bumping shoulders. Somewhere a dog barks with the offended certainty of an animal who knows the household routine has been violated. Overhead the sky is not yet loud, but everyone listens to it anyway. That is one of the changes war made to civilians. It trained them to listen vertically. In those last minutes, the city contains two kinds of time. There is clock time, the number of minutes since the siren, the rough estimate of how long before the raiders arrive, the memory of how long last night's alert lasted. Then there is body time, which stretches and folds. The walk to the shelter feels too slow and too fast at once. Too slow because danger may be coming. Too fast because leaving the house is an admission that danger has already entered the evening. A person might look back at the front door for 1 second longer than necessary. It is just a door, painted perhaps, scratched near the handle, familiar in a way that only a daily object can be familiar. But during the Blitz, a front door could become a question. Will this still be here when I return? Will the windows be in? Will the roof be on? Will the kettle still be on the stove? That is not melodrama. People returned from shelters to find streets altered, houses open to the weather, rooms exposed, furniture hanging absurdly from broken upper floors, wallpaper visible from the road. The domestic world, which is supposed to hide its private life behind walls, could be split open in seconds. So the glance back at the door is not sentimental. It is a tiny inventory of everything that might be lost while you are underground. The siren still sounds, or perhaps it has stopped and left behind something worse, the waiting silence after the warning. The alert itself is frightening, but the period just after it can feel even more charged. The command has been given, the crowd is moving. The aircraft are somewhere out there, no one knows exactly where. Some nights the warning comes and nothing much seems to happen nearby. Other nights the bombs arrive before everyone reaches cover. That uncertainty makes every sound significant. A lorry backfiring, a dropped tin, a door slamming. People look up even though the blackout has made looking nearly useless. On some nights searchlights will comb the sky. Anti-aircraft guns will begin. The deep thud of heavy guns around London will become part of the raid's terrible music. But not yet, or not fully yet. For now, the last ordinary sounds still survive. Footsteps, children being told to hurry, the rustle of blankets, the hard little clack of gas mask boxes, someone asking if anyone has seen the cat, someone answering that there is no time for the cat. That small exchange might sound almost comic from a distance, but inside it is the pain of civilian war. You cannot save everything. You have to choose quickly, and sometimes the thing left behind is alive. The shelter entrance is ahead. It may be marked by a sign, painted letters, a warden's lamp, or simply the movement of people toward a known doorway. If it is an underground station, the familiar everyday entrance has changed its meaning. In peacetime, those stairs meant work, shopping, visits, theatres, errands, and the ordinary machinery of London movement. During the Blitz, the same entrance becomes a throat through which the neighbourhood passes into the earth. This change in meaning is one of the most remarkable features of wartime London. The city did not build an entirely separate world beneath itself overnight. It repurposed what it had. Stations, tunnels, cellars, basements, crypts, arches, trenches, cupboards, gardens. Safety was improvised from infrastructure. An underground platform was never designed to be a bedroom for hundreds of people, but people made it one because the alternative was worse. London Transport Museum records how stations became shelter spaces during wartime as air raids forced people underground, and this created a new form of nightlife inside the transport system. Not nightlife in the cheerful sense, nightlife in the literal sense, life that had to continue underground at night because the surface had become dangerous. At the entrance, the pace slows. It always does. A crowd can move freely along a street and then stumble at the exact point where everyone most wants to hurry. Steps create bottlenecks. So do ticket halls, narrow doors, awkward bundles, prams, elderly bodies, children who suddenly refuse to descend, and people who stop to adjust what they are carrying. The family is close enough now to feel the press of others. This is the moment when privacy begins to disappear. A stranger's elbow touches your arm. Someone's blanket brushes your face. You hear a couple arguing under their breath. You smell damp wool and tobacco and hair oil. The mother tightens her hold on the little one because a crowd can take a child from you in less than a second. Not maliciously, not deliberately, simply by moving. The father turns sideways to shield them. The older boy is told again to keep close. He says he is keeping close, but he is also looking at everything because this is what children do. He sees the warden's helmet. He sees the old woman gripping the rail. He sees a young soldier on leave helping someone carry a bag. He sees fear acting like ordinary behaviour. There may be a moment of irritation at the top of the stairs. Someone ahead has brought a suitcase too large for the shelter rules. Someone is trying to carry bedding that blocks half the passage. Someone objects to being hurried. The warden snaps. The person snaps back. The crowd murmurs. Then from somewhere above or farther off comes the first heavy sound that silences the argument. It may not be a bomb. It may be a gun. It may be distant enough to belong to another borough. But distance does not matter at first. The body hears impact and makes its own decision. The movement tightens, the crowd descends. The stairs are darker than the street, though perhaps safer. That is the exchange. Less sky for less space. Down here, the yup. Siren loses its wide outdoor authority and becomes muffled by walls and bodies. The family moves step by step. The little girl held by the hand or carried if she has started crying. The mother can feel the temperature change. Shelters were often cold, but the descent itself could feel close and airless once bodies gathered. Concrete, tile, brick, metal, old dust. The city's underground spaces had their own climate. If the station is deep, the stairs seem longer than they should. If it is a basement shelter, the ceiling may already feel too low. If it is a trench shelter, the smell of damp earth may come up before the family has fully entered. Every kind of shelter asks the same question in a different accent. Can you bear to stay here until the danger passes? Behind them, more people are arriving. Above them, London continues to darken. The last minutes before shelter are almost over, and the next kind of time is beginning. This is the time when people have done what they can do, and must now sit with what they cannot control. They have brought the children, blankets, the gas masks, the small parcel of food. They have obeyed the siren. They have left the house. They have entered the crowd. All of that took effort, decision and discipline, but none of it can stop the aircraft. None of it can choose where a bomb falls. This is why the inside of a shelter held such a strange mixture of relief and helplessness. Reaching it was an achievement. Staying in it was surrender of a kind, not surrender to the enemy, but surrender to waiting. The family reaches the bottom. The platform, cellar, tunnel or shelter room opens in front of them. People are already there, arranged along walls, claiming benches, spreading blankets, shifting bags, making room with the reluctance of those who know there is never enough room. A warden gestures them further in. The mother scans for a place where the children can sit. The father looks back once toward the stairs, where the last slice of the blacked-out city is still visible above the moving heads. Then the entrance narrows behind more bodies, and the shelter receives them into its damp, crowded light. The movement underground was not a single dramatic rush. That is one of the first things to understand. In memory and film, an air raid often becomes a quick sequence. Siren, street, stairs, shelter, explosion. But for the people actually living through it, those few minutes could stretch into a whole small ordeal of their own. Getting below the surface was work. It required order in the dark, patience in a frightened crowd, and the strange discipline of ordinary people who had been told to hurry but not panic. The family joins the line at the entrance with their bundles pressed against them and the siren still in their ears. The mother has one child by the hand and another close against her side. The father carries the heavier blanket roll and perhaps a small case with food, papers, and whatever the family thinks it cannot do without for one night. The older boy has been given responsibility for something, because children in wartime were often made useful before they were emotionally ready to be brave. A gas mask box, a pillow, a tin cup, something small enough to carry, important enough to make him feel trusted, and awkward enough to keep knocking against his knee as the queue moves. In front of them, people are already negotiating the stairs. Behind them, more bodies press forward from the dark street. Everyone wants to be down. Everyone knows that pushing makes things worse. Everyone also knows that if the aircraft are close, the difference between the pavement and the shelter may feel like the difference between life and death. The entrance to a shelter during the Blitz had a life of its own. It gathered the whole neighbourhood into one narrow point and forced people to behave socially under pressure. At home, fear could be private. You could hide it by folding a blanket, tying a child's shoe, pretending to look for matches or saying something useless about the weather. At the shelter entrance, fear became visible in how people stood, how they held their bundles, how quickly they spoke, how sharply they reacted when someone blocked the way. A woman who was polite at the greengrocer might snap at a stranger who stopped on the stairs. A man who thought of himself as steady might suddenly find he could not bear the slowness of an old person in front of him. An elderly woman who had survived grief, poverty, childbirth, illness, and one war already might look at the dark stairwell and refuse to move until someone took her arm. That was not cowardice. It was the body objecting to being sent below ground in a crowd while a city waited for bombs. The warden or shelter marshal at the entrance had to manage all of this with a voice firm enough to be obeyed, and human enough not to make panic worse. The Royal Air Force Museum notes that shelter marshals were appointed in underground stations to keep order, give first aid, and assist in emergencies. which sounds tidy as a job description, until you picture trying to do it with hundreds or thousands of tired civilians carrying bedding into a station during an alert. The stairs themselves mattered more than people usually realise. A stairway is simple when you're alone. It is only steps and a rail. In a raid, it became a test of crowd behaviour. Shoes slipped on worn edges. Children stumbled because adults moved at a different pace. Blankets dragged. Gas mask boxes swung from shoulders and caught against other people's bags. Prams were a problem, and every family with a baby knew it. You could not easily take a pram down a crowded station staircase, but leaving it behind meant carrying the baby all night, along with bedding, milk, nappies, and all the small, miserable necessities of keeping an infant alive and quiet in public. Some people brought bedding because a night on a platform without it could be brutal. Others resented the people who brought bedding because it took up space. This was one of the constant tensions of shelter life. The things that made endurance possible for one family made crowding worse for another. A blanket could be comfort, but in a line it was also bulk. A pillow could help a child sleep, but it could also become the object someone behind you cursed under their breath when the queue stopped again. The government had not originally intended the underground to become the great public dormitory of Blitz memory. Officials feared disruption to transport, loss of control, and what some called a deep shelter mentality. The concern that people would become too attached to underground refuge and unwilling to continue normal work above ground. Imperial War Museum's records that the government initially tried to prevent London Underground stations being used as shelters, but Londoners persisted and the policy had to change. Stations such as Aldwych were adapted, and other stations received improvements including bunks, better lighting, washing facilities, and toilets. That detail reveals something important about the shelter story. Ordinary Londoners were not simply passive recipients of civil defence. They made judgments. They looked at surface shelters, basements, garden shelters, railway arches and tube stations, and many decided with their feet that depth felt safer. You can call that practical instinct, collective pressure, or disobedience wrapped in common sense. Whatever name you give it, it shaped the way London survived its nights. For families who had access to an Anderson shelter in a garden, going underground meant something different. The Anderson was not deep in the way a tube station was deep. It was a small, corrugated steel structure, partly buried and covered with earth, designed in 1938 for garden use, and the RAF Museum notes that when covered with earth, it offered some protection from fragments and splinters, though dampness remained a persistent problem. Imagine stepping out the back door in the blackout, not toward a station, but toward a dark patch of garden. The grass is wet. The child is half asleep. The shelter roof is low. Someone has to lift the door or pull aside the cover. Inside, the smell is metal, soil, old bedding, and damp wool. If it has rained, the floor may be muddy or wet enough that the family has laid down boards. Slugs were not unknown visitors. Neither were spiders. People joked about it because joking helped, but a joke did not make the shelter warmer. The Anderson could be close to home, which was a comfort, but that closeness could also be cruel. If a bomb fell nearby, you were close enough to hear your own windows go. You were close enough to wonder whether the roof of your house had lifted, whether the chimney had cracked, whether the kitchen ceiling was now in the sink. Safety in the garden still kept the house in your imagination. For people using public shelters, the queue introduced another kind of anxiety. There was the fear of not getting in. This was not imaginary. Some shelters filled, some were poorly built, some were unpopular because people did not trust them. Surface communal shelters had been built in a hurry, and the RAF Museum records that quality control problems caused some to fail to provide the protection expected, which helped make them unpopular throughout the war. So when a family approached a public shelter and saw a line already forming, the question was immediate. Is there room? Will they turn us away? Is there another place close enough? These questions had to be asked in darkness, under a warning, with children at hand and aircraft somewhere beyond sight. It is easy, from a distance, to say that people should remain calm. It is harder to remain calm while calculating shelter capacity in your head and hearing the low beginnings of anti-aircraft fire from another part of London. At an underground station, the crowd often arranged itself around habit. Regular shelterers knew where they liked to sleep. They knew which platform edge was colder, which wall was damp, which corner caught the draught from the tunnel, which place was near enough to the lavatory to be useful but not so near that the smell became part of the night. This familiarity could produce a strange version of ownership. People who had no legal claim to a patch of platform might still feel that another family had taken their place. In the early weeks before the shelter system became more formal, some people simply bought cheap underground tickets and went down, using the transport system as refuge because it was there, and it felt safer than the surface. Over time, authorities adapted with bunks, tickets, designated areas, marshals and facilities, but the origin of the tube shelter habit was much rougher than the later photographs sometimes suggest. The RAF Museum records that stations were fitted with bunks for 22,000 people, supplied with first aid facilities, chemical toilets, and 124 canteens across the tube system, while an estimated 170,000 people sheltered in tunnels and stations during the war. Those numbers are useful, but they can become too clean. A bunk for 22,000 people sounds organised. A queue of tired mothers trying to get children down a staircase before the bombs arrive does not feel organised. Both were true. The family reaches the turn in the stairs. The younger child wants to be carried. The mother cannot carry her easily because both hands are full, so the father shifts the blanket roll and lifts the child against his shoulder. This makes him wider in the stairwell. Someone behind exhales sharply. Not a word exactly, just the sound of impatience. The father hears it and says nothing. The child's face is pressed against his coat and he can feel her breathing. She's old enough to understand fear, but too young to manage it politely. Her gas mask box knocks against his hip. The older boy is embarrassed by the slowness of his family, because children often feel public inconvenience as shame. He wants them to move faster. He wants to be brave enough not to care. He wants to look behind him, but his mother has told him not to turn around. The stairs smell of dust, damp stone, cigarette smoke, and people. There may be an electric light, but it is not enough to make the place cheerful. There may be a painted sign directing shelterers onward. There may be a warden at the landing telling everyone to keep moving down and not to stop at the bottom. That instruction matters because the bottom of stairs is where crowds hesitate. People reach what feels like safety and pause to look, breathe, choose a direction, adjust their load. But in a crowd, one person's pause travels backward through bodies like a blockage in water. There is a reason later Londoners would remember stairways with such seriousness. The Bethnal Green disaster of March 3rd, 1943, when 173 people died in a crush while entering the station shelter, remains one of the darkest reminders that sheltering itself could be dangerous when crowding, fear, poor conditions and sudden movement converged. That disaster is not the event we are entering tonight, but it belongs in the background of any honest account of going underground during the Blitz. The danger was not only falling masonry and high explosive, it was also the human pressure created by thousands of people trying to reach safety through spaces that were never designed for that emotional weight. A staircase can be architecture in the morning and a hazard by nightfall. A handrail can become a lifeline. A dropped bundle can become a problem. A single stumble can change the movement of everyone behind you. On a more ordinary night, the descent was controlled enough to become routine, and routine is one of the strangest features of civilian life under bombing. The same people who had once found the idea of sleeping in a station almost unthinkable began to develop preferences. They knew to bring cardboard to put under bedding. They knew that newspapers could be used as insulation. They knew that a suitcase could serve as a backrest, a pillow, a table, or a boundary line. They knew which shelterers snored, which children cried, which couples argued, which old men told the same stories from the last war, and which women could produce a needle, a safety pin, a boiled sweet, or a piece of advice from a handbag that seemed to contain an entire household. The queue down the stairs was therefore not only fear, it was habit under fear. People recognised one another. Someone might say, "You're late tonight," as if they were arriving at a club rather than a refuge. Someone might answer, "Had to get the washing in," because the washing still mattered. That is not a sentimental detail. It is historically important. War did not erase domestic life. It crowded it into smaller spaces and made it continue under worse conditions. The blankets deserve attention because they carried so much of home with them. A blanket taken to shelter was rarely fresh, in the way a guest room blanket might be fresh. It smelled of the family's house, of soap, smoke, damp, cooking, sleep, and the cupboard where it was stored. When spread on a platform or bench, it transformed public ground into a temporary family space. It said, "This is where we are." It made a bed where no bed belonged. Mothers used blankets to cover children, but also to screen them while changing clothes, to soften a hard surface, to hide a child's face from frightening sights, or to create a little tent of privacy in a place where privacy had almost vanished. Older people wrapped blankets around their shoulders and sat with the patient misery of those who knew the night would be long. Men sometimes pretended not to need them until the cold came up through the floor. A blanket could become a border in a crowded shelter, but it was never a secure one. Feet crossed it. Bags nudged it. Strangers stepped too close. In a normal bedroom, bedding belongs to the person using it. In a shelter, bedding had to negotiate with everyone else's body. As the family reaches the lower level, the sound changes again. The street is gone now, or almost gone. The siren is muffled. The queue becomes a shuffling pressure rather than a line. The air feels used before they have even found a place. If this is a tube station, there may be tiled walls and the faint smell of railway tunnels. If trains are still running earlier in the evening, movement and shelter overlap awkwardly. Commuters, shelterers, staff, wardens, luggage, bedding, and transport all sharing the same system under different rules. If it is later, when shelter use has taken over the space, the station feels less like a place of travel and more like a camp set inside a machine. Platforms, corridors and passageways fill with bodies, arranged not for movement, but for waiting. The advertisements remain on the walls, bright promises from a world that had not expected to become a dormitory. A smiling face selling soap, a seaside poster, a theatre announcement, a food advertisement that might make hungry people look away. Those posters must have seemed almost absurd in the dim shelter light, not because they were false exactly, but because they belonged to a city that could still imagine leisure without interruption. The fear does not disappear once the family is below. It changes form. On the stairs, fear is active. Move faster. Hold the child. Do not fall. Do not lose the bag. Find space. Underground, fear becomes seated. It settles into the chest and waits there. People arrange themselves and then begin listening. Listening is one of the main labours of shelter life. The ears try to read distance, direction and meaning. A thud far away allows conversation to continue after a pause. A nearer crash stops everyone. The guns can sound protective and terrifying at the same time. Aircraft engines, when audible, are worse because they seem to search. Shelter walls create strange acoustics. A bomb that is not especially close may sound close. A bomb that is close may first be felt through the floor or the lungs, before the mind understands it as sound. But in these first moments, before the raid has fully settled over the city, people are still busy with placement. Fear has to wait while practical matters are handled. The mother looks for somewhere the children can sit without being trampled. That is her first concern, not comfort in a large sense, not dignity, just a place where the children can be contained. She spots a narrow space along a wall between a woman with 2 sleeping boys and an older man with a folded coat under his head. The space is not enough, but shelter spaces almost never are. She asks with her face before she asks with words. The woman shifts her boys. The older man pulls his knees closer. No one is delighted. Everyone understands. This is one of the shelter's quiet moral economies. You give 3 inches because someday you may need 3 inches. You pretend not to notice someone's fear because later you may need them not to notice yours. You share a corner of newspaper, a match, a sweet, information, gossip, a complaint, a joke. None of this makes the shelter pleasant. It makes it bearable. The father lays down the blanket, not fully because there is no room, but folded enough to keep the children off the coldest surface. The youngest child is placed against the wall, where she cannot be knocked from behind. The older boy sits at the edge and is told to keep his legs in. He feels cheated because the adults always give him the exposed place, but he also feels proud because exposed places are for bigger children. The mother sits last. This is not a rule written anywhere. It is simply how families often work in emergencies. The person managing everyone else's comfort discovers her own body after the others are settled. She may still be wearing her coat. She may be too warm from the rush and soon too cold from sitting still. She may feel the edge of a sandwich tin digging into her side. She may realise she forgot something, perhaps the baby's extra cloth, perhaps her own scarf, perhaps nothing essential but enough to trouble her all night. In shelter life, forgotten objects gained power. A missing spoon could matter. A lost glove could make a child cry. A left-behind ration book could become tomorrow's anxiety. Nearby, the queue continues to feed the shelter. More people arrive. The atmosphere thickens. Someone tries to step over the family's blanket and apologises when a boot catches the corner. Someone asks whether there is room further along. Someone says there is no room but people keep coming anyway. A shelter marshal directs latecomers down the platform. The marshal's job is order, but order in a crowded shelter is always partial. People obey when they must and resist when obedience threatens the small territory they have made. A man refuses to move because his wife is ill. A woman insists she was here first. A teenager tries to slip into a better place and is caught by an adult who knows every trick because he once used them himself. Children stare, babies cry. Old people lower themselves slowly as if every joint has an opinion. The shelter fills, not like a room fills for a meeting, but like a ship takes on survivors. There is something else happening underground that is easy to miss if you only think about bombs. Classes being rearranged, not abolished, but pressed into new shapes. London was a deeply class-conscious city. Accent, clothing, posture, occupation, neighbourhood and manners all carried meaning. A public shelter forced people into physical proximity that normal life might have avoided. Clerks sat near dock workers. Shop assistants slept near office men. Domestic servants might share a platform with people whose homes had once employed women like them. In some shelters, class differences remained obvious and could produce tension. In others, shared danger softened the edges. A person who would never have entered another person's front room might spend 12 hours beside them underground, sharing tea and complaint. The Blitz did not create perfect unity. That is a myth too neat for real life. But it did create situations in which people had to practice a rough temporary equality of need. A bomb did not ask whether the person beneath it owned the house or rented one room. Underground, a blanket was a blanket, a cough was a cough, and fear made fewer distinctions than society did. The family has reached shelter, but the descent has not fully ended. Their bodies are still adjusting from motion to stillness. The father's shoulder aches from carrying the child. The mother is counting without looking as if counting could protect them. 1 child, 2nd child, 3rd parcel, gas masks, blanket, food tin. The older boy looks toward the stairs where more people are still coming down, and for a moment the entrance seems impossibly narrow for the number of lives trying to pass through it. The younger child asks whether the bombs can get them down here. This is the kind of question adults dread because the truthful answer is too large, and the comforting answer is too simple. So the mother says they are safer here. Not completely safe. Safer It is a careful word, and perhaps the child hears the difference, perhaps not. Then the first nearer sound comes through the structure above them. A deep, heavy concussion, distant enough not to bring dust down, close enough to quiet the platform. Conversations stop in layers. First the people nearest the stair, then the family, then those farther down who have not heard the sound clearly, but have heard everyone else stop. That is how fear travels in a shelter. Not only through noise, but through silence. A baby continues crying for 2 seconds into the hush before the mother covers it closer against her chest. Someone says, "That was over the river," with the confidence of a person who cannot possibly know. Someone else says, "No, docks." A man with experience of raids shakes his head, but does not offer an opinion. People want geography because geography gives terror a place to stand. If the bomb is in the docks, it is not here. If it is over the river, it is not this street. If it is west, north, south, anywhere else, then for one more minute the shelter has done its job. Above them, the city is entering the full machinery of the raid, and below, on the hard benches and folded blankets, people settle into the damp light with their coats still buttoned and their ears turned upward. Inside the shelter, the first thing that changed was the air. Not the danger, not the mood, not the sound of the raid above, but the air itself. At street level, even under blackout, there was space for breath to disappear into. You could turn your head and feel the night on your face. You could smell rain on brick, soot from chimneys, the river somewhere beyond the houses, horse and petrol and coal smoke, all the ordinary ingredients of London air. Down here, the air had nowhere to go. It was held under ceilings, against tiled walls, inside tunnels, behind sandbagged entrances, beneath schools, under railway arches, in basements that had never been meant to hold so many people for so many hours. It gathered everything and kept it. Wet wool, damp concrete, tobacco smoke, hair oil, soap, old dust, milk gone slightly sour in a baby's bottle, boots, blankets brought from beds that were still warm upstairs, the faint sharp smell of disinfectant if the shelter was organised enough to have any, the heavier smell from chemical toilets if it was not organised enough to have enough of them, and beneath all of that, not easy to name but impossible to miss, was the smell of waiting bodies, people who had worked all day, run or hurried or stumbled through dark streets, carried children, lifted bundles, queued on stairs, and now sat pressed together in a place where dignity had to make do with very little room. The family settles into the narrow place they have found along the wall, and for a few moments they are too busy to feel the full weight of where they are. That is often how fear behaves. It gives you tasks first. Put the blanket down. Move the food tin. Keep your feet in. Sit the little one there. Do not lean on that man's coat. Take off the gas mask box before the string cuts into your neck. The mother tucks the blanket under the children's legs because the cold rises from the floor quickly. The father shifts the bundle behind his back, then moves it again because the edge digs into him. The older boy tries to look as if he knows what he is doing. He has been here before, perhaps many times, and that gives him a kind of authority in his own mind, but the shelter still makes him uneasy. Not only because of bombs, because everything is too close. Adult knees, strange shoes, voices he does not know, a baby crying without stopping, a woman coughing into a handkerchief. The little girl beside him asks if they will sleep here all night, and nobody answers immediately because the truth depends on aircraft, weather, guns, fuel, aim, luck, and the decision of men high above them who will never see her face. If this shelter is an underground station, it is already becoming something between a camp, a dormitory, a waiting room, and a village hall that has been pushed under the earth. Tube stations were not designed for this purpose, and at first the authorities resisted their use as mass shelters, but Londoners went down anyway, buying tickets or forcing the issue by their numbers, and by 21st September 1940, around 120,000 people were sheltering in London's underground stations. By October, the number had risen to about 124,000, with thousands in individual stations such as King's Cross. That number sounds large enough on its own, but it becomes more meaningful when you imagine it multiplied into details. Every one of those people had a body that needed warmth, space, sleep, air, and a lavatory. Every one of them had belongings. Every family had its own habits, irritations, tempers, and small emergencies. A station platform might look broad in daylight when commuters pass through it in motion, but sheltering changes the meaning of space. A place meant for people to stand briefly while waiting for a train becomes a place where families lie down. Corridors designed for movement become sleeping rows. The edge of a platform useful in transport becomes a hazard for tired children. Stairs that carried commuters become bottlenecks. Signs telling people where to change lines remain on the walls. But now no one is trying to travel across London. They are trying to outlast the night. The lighting inside is poor by modern standards, but after the blackout it may feel almost generous for a few minutes. A few bulbs, shaded lamps, perhaps emergency lighting, perhaps the glow from a canteen stall if the shelter has one. Enough to see faces, not enough to make them comfortable. The light catches on helmets, spectacles, damp tiles, tin mugs, pram wheels, and the brass clasps of gas mask boxes. It leaves the corners uncertain. The family sits inside a half-lit crowd where everyone is visible and no one is fully seen. That is one of the oddest things about shelter life. It exposed people physically while keeping them emotionally guarded. You might sleep beside strangers, hear a husband and wife quarrel in whispers, watch a mother feed a baby, see an old man remove his boots and rub his swollen feet, and still not know the person's name. Or you might learn names quickly because names are useful when fear repeats itself night after night. Mrs. Lewis from the bakery queue. Alf, who works at the depot. The woman with the twins. The old soldier who always brings peppermints. The red-haired boy who never stops asking questions. The shelter takes private lives and places them in rows, close enough that people begin to form judgments before they form friendships. The wardens and shelter marshals move through this low world with a difficult kind of authority. They're not soldiers in the frontline sense, but they wear helmets and carry responsibility. In underground stations, shelter marshals were appointed to keep order, give first aid, and assist in emergencies, while stations were gradually provided with bunks, first aid facilities, chemical toilets, and canteens as the authorities accepted the scale of sheltering below ground. Their instructions are practical and repeated until they become part of the background. Keep clear of the platform edge, move further down, do not block the stairs, children must not run, rubbish goes in the proper place, have your ticket ready, leave in the morning before the trains need to run. The Transport for London archive records that shelterers were told to obey conditions of use, including arriving after 6:30 in the evening, leaving by 7 o'clock in the morning, keeping away from the platform edge, controlling children, taking rubbish home, and cooperating with staff. Those rules may sound dry, but every one of them came from a real problem. People arrived too early because they wanted good places. They stayed too late because exhaustion made the morning cruel. Children wandered because children cannot remain still forever. Rubbish accumulated because a night underground produces waste the way any human settlement does. The shelter was not only a refuge from bombs, it was a public health problem, a transport problem, a childcare problem, a sanitation problem, and a problem of human patience. The mother notices the toilet situation almost immediately because mothers often have to know where the toilet is before anyone else admits needing it. In some shelters, sanitation was primitive. In others, it improved as the Blitz continued. But even improved sanitation did not mean comfort. Chemical toilets in crowded spaces announced themselves. Queues formed. Children asked at the worst times. Older people struggled. Privacy was scarce. A woman could be brave about bombs and still dread taking a child to the lavatory through a crowded shelter in the dark. The smell carried back into the sleeping areas. People complained. People endured. There is a tendency, when telling wartime stories, to talk about morale as if it were made only of speeches, songs, and flags. But morale was also whether the lavatory was bearable. It was whether a mother could get hot water for a baby bottle. It was whether there was enough ventilation to stop everyone waking with headaches. It was whether the man beside you took up more than his share of the bench. It was whether the child behind you kicked all night. Human beings do not survive history in the large categories we use afterward. They survive it in inches, smells, routines, and complaints. Somewhere nearby, tea is being discussed. It always seems to appear in British wartime accounts, sometimes so often that a modern listener may think it has become a joke. But it was not a joke to the people holding the cup. Tea was warmth. Tea was normality. Tea gave the hands something to do, and the mouth something familiar to taste. In some tube shelters, canteens were opened, and the RAF Museum notes that 124 canteens operated across the tube system. A canteen could change the atmosphere of a shelter more than you might expect. It created a point of movement, a reason to stand, a small economy of cups, coins, cues, and conversation. Cocoa for children, tea for adults, perhaps something to eat if supplies and rationing allowed. It did not erase fear, but it gave fear a timetable. First, get settled. Then see if there is tea, then get the children quiet, then wait. An East End account of sheltering under railway arches remembered a canteen run in the shelter, selling coffee, cocoa, tea, and keeping people cheerful enough that the speaker recalled it as one big family. A phrase that is both touching and too simple, because families also quarrel, smell, crowd one another, and know too much about each other's habits. The family may not be close enough to the canteen to benefit yet. For now, the mother opens the tin they brought and checks the sandwiches, not because anyone is hungry at once, but because knowing food is there steadies her. Food in a shelter is more than food. It is evidence that the family planned, that the night has limits, that the children can be distracted if the noise grows worse. The sandwiches are probably plain, cheese if they have it, dripping, jam, something practical, wrapped in paper that has already softened at the edges. The little girl wants one immediately. The mother says not yet. The girl says she is hungry. The mother says later. This is not meanness. It is rationing at the scale of one family inside one night. If the raid lasts until morning, everything must last with it. Adults in wartime became skilled at stretching things: food, sleep, patience, coal, cloth, truth. Around them, the shelter is building its evening pattern. Some people lie down almost as soon as they arrive, because exhaustion has outrun fear. This is one of the facts that surprises people. We imagine no one could sleep under bombardment, but people did, sometimes because the body simply took what it needed. A tired dock worker, factory girl, clerk, nurse, or mother of three might fall asleep with the gun sounding because sleep was no longer a peaceful choice. It was a physical ambush. Others cannot sleep at all and resent those who can. Snoring becomes an offence. Whispering becomes an offence. A child's game becomes an offence. Someone stepping over your legs becomes an offence. In a shelter, manners are not decorative. They are survival equipment. Do not take another person's regular place. Do not put your feet where someone's head will be. Do not let children run wild. Do not talk too loudly after people settle. Do not pretend your family needs more room than every other family. These rules may not all be posted on a wall, but they are enforced by looks, mutters, sharp remarks, and the collective pressure of people who have to share the same stale air until the all clear. Children complicate everything because they bring life into a space built around fear. Some are frightened into silence. Some become wild with nervous energy. A boy rolls a marble and is told to stop. A girl sings under her breath until her brother tells her she's doing it wrong. Someone has brought a comic, already creased and read by 3 children in the row. A baby refuses to settle because babies do not understand civic emergency. A toddler announces, loudly, that it smells horrible down here, and several adults smile because the toddler has said what everyone is thinking. The shelter asks children to behave like miniature adults while adults themselves are struggling not to behave like frightened children. This is why small kindnesses mattered. A sweet passed from an old woman's pocket. A paper folded into a boat. A story told quietly by someone who had not expected to become useful that way. A child allowed to hold a torch for 10 seconds under strict supervision. The shelter could be harsh, but it could also produce tenderness because the alternative was to let fear have the whole room. The damp is constant. It sits in clothing and bedding, in the walls, in the floor, in the smell of coats that have not properly dried since the last raid. In an Anderson shelter, dampness was so common that it became one of the main reasons families disliked using them, even though they could provide protection from blast fragments when properly covered with earth. In a tube station, the damp is different, mixed with the underground's own stale warmth and mechanical dust. In a basement, it can feel like old building breath. Damp affects mood in ways that are easy to underestimate. A dry person can be patient longer than a wet one. A dry blanket feels like comfort. A damp blanket becomes a compromise. Children grow chilled. Old injuries ache. Shoes steam faintly and then cool. The mother rubs the little girl's hands between her own. The older boy says he's not cold, though he is. The father shifts his coat so that it covers the child's knees as well as his own. No one calls this heroism. It is just what you do when a floor is cold and the night is not over. The walls of the shelter carry sound strangely. Above, the city is beginning to work through the first stages of the raid. Anti-aircraft guns thud in the distance, not continuously yet, but enough that people stop speaking when they hear them. The sound is different from bombs, and experienced shelterers learn the difference. Guns have a pattern. Bombs interrupt. Guns can be imagined as protection, even when they frighten you. Bombs are decisionless when they arrive. Somewhere overhead, searchlights may be crossing the sky, though no one down here can see them. Somewhere, fire watchers are taking positions on roofs, prepared to deal with incendiaries. Somewhere, fire engines are already moving or waiting to move. Somewhere, a person who refused to come to shelter is sitting under the stairs, listening alone. The people underground are safer than some, less safe than they hope, and cut off from knowing which is true minute by minute. That ignorance is part of the shelter's pressure. You're not only waiting for bombs, you're waiting for information. What street? How close? Is it the docks? Is it the railway? Is it our side? Did anyone see the glow? The shelter fills with rumours before it fills with dust. A man near the family says he can tell by the sound that the raid is moving east. Another says nonsense, that is south. A third says nothing, which may make him seem wiser than both. People become amateur interpreters of danger because interpretation feels like control. If you can name the direction, the type of aircraft, the weight of the gun, the distance of the blast, then perhaps you're not merely sitting in the dark. Perhaps you are reading the night. The father listens but does not join in. He has no wish to be wrong out loud. The mother listens too, though she pretends to adjust the child's scarf. She's learning the shelter's emotional. Weather. Who panics? Who gossips? Who reassures? Who talks too much? Who might help if something happens? This is a practical intelligence that rarely appears in official histories. Women in shelters often managed more than their own families. They managed moods, children's fears, the distribution of food, the small diplomacy of shared space, and the steady work of keeping the night from becoming unbearable. There are first aid supplies somewhere, perhaps a post if the station is organised enough. Transport for London records that concern over shelterers' well-being and infection led to medical and first aid posts, with the first at South Kensington opening in December 1940 and 86 posts eventually established. On this night, before that system is fully mature in every place, first aid may mean a trained volunteer, a box of bandages, a nurse on her way home, or a person who knows enough to stop bleeding until someone else comes. Everyone hopes none of it will be needed, but the knowledge that it exists nearby changes the shelter slightly. A first aid sign is a promise, however limited. It says that injury has been imagined and that someone has been appointed to answer it. War turns signs into comfort, exit, shelter, first aid, canteen, way out. These words matter because they arrange fear into something legible. The shelter also has pests, because large groups of people underground create conditions that insects and vermin do not politely avoid. The Transport for London archive even records mosquitoes as an unpleasant problem in tube shelters, with sprays and compressors being used for disinfection and attention given to eliminating them. That detail feels almost absurd at first. Bombers overhead, and people are dealing with mosquitoes. But history is full of that kind of insult. Disaster does not replace ordinary discomfort. It adds itself on top. You can be afraid of high explosives and still be irritated by an insect bite. You can be sheltering from a raid and still worry about lice, coughs, dirty blankets, chilblains, and whether the child has lost a mitten. Those minor miseries do not make the larger danger smaller. They make it more real, because people experience catastrophe through bodies that itch, ache, hunger, and need sleep. As the evening lengthens, people begin to take on shelter postures. There is the upright sitter, determined not to make this a bedroom. There is the curled sleeper, coat pulled over face. There is the mother half sitting, half lying, with a child across her lap, unable to move because the child has finally gone quiet. There is the man with his hat over his eyes, pretending to sleep so no one speaks to him. There is the old woman with both hands around her bag. There is the teenager restless at the edge of the light, too old to be comforted and too young to be calm. There is the warden moving through all of them, stepping over feet, enforcing rules that sound petty until one remembers the platform edge, the toilets, the stairs, the need to clear the station in the morning. A whole temporary society is forming in rows and clusters, with customs, leaders, irritations, regulars, newcomers, and people no one quite trusts. The family's place has become theirs after only a short time, and that is how quickly territory forms under pressure. The folded blanket marks it. The father's case marks one side, the mother's body marks the other. The children are placed in the middle like valuables. A stranger sits too close and the father shifts slightly, not enough to start an argument, enough to say there is a boundary here. The stranger shifts back. No words are needed. Everyone is negotiating constantly. The old man nearby offers the younger child half a peppermint. The mother hesitates, then accepts. The child takes it with 2 fingers and forgets for a moment to be afraid. That is how relief enters the shelter, not as a grand feeling, but as a small sweet on a frightened tongue. More sounds come from above. The guns are heavier now. A rumble passes through the station, or the basement, or the tunnel, and a little dust falls from somewhere overhead. Not much. Enough. Conversation stops again. This time it takes longer to restart. The mother puts a hand on the child before the child asks. The father looks toward the ceiling as if looking could tell him anything. Someone laughs once, too sharply, then apologizes. Another person says, "That was close," and someone else says, "Not so close," because reassurance doesn't have to be accurate to be useful. In that moment, the smell of the shelter seems stronger because everyone has gone quiet and breath itself becomes noticeable. Damp concrete, wet wool, human heat, smoke, tea, fear, waiting. The air is thick with all of it, and the people inside sit shoulder to shoulder, pretending to be used to a thing no one should have had to get used to, while above them London begins to take the blows of another night. The first bomb that a shelter hears is rarely understood as a bomb in the first instant. That is one of the strangest things about it. You might expect the sound to announce itself clearly, like a name spoken in a room, but it does not always do that. It arrives as pressure first, or as a great dull blow somewhere beyond the walls, or as a vibration rising through the floor into the bones before the ear has arranged it into meaning. The family is sitting close together now, the blanket tucked badly around the children's legs, the mother with her back against the damp wall, the father angled toward the open space as if his body could form a door. Around them, the shelter has settled into that uncomfortable half-order that comes after everyone has found a place, but before anyone has truly accepted the night. People are still shifting. Someone is still arguing quietly about room. A baby is still crying in a tired, angry rhythm. A man is tapping cigarette ash into a tin lid. Somewhere down the platform or across the basement, or beyond a row of bodies under a railway arch, a woman has begun knitting because her hands cannot bear to be still. The shelter is full of human noises, all the little signs that a crowd is trying to convince itself it is simply waiting, and then the first heavy concussion comes through the structure above them and every one of those noises changes. It is not yet the nearest explosion. It may be streets away, it may be across the river, it may be at the docks, where so many of the early raids fell because the docks were a military and economic target. But distance is not comfort when you cannot see it. The sound rolls through the shelter and takes the conversation with it. A few people look upward. One child begins to cry harder. The man with the cigarette stops with it halfway to his mouth. The knitting needles pause, held in both hands like tools from a life that has been briefly suspended. This is the moment when the raid ceases to be an approaching possibility and becomes a fact inside the room. London had heard this kind of sound again and again by the autumn of 1940. The Blitz began on September 7th, the day later remembered as Black Saturday, when German bombers struck London and left hundreds dead and many more injured. After that, the city was bombed for 57 consecutive nights, often in daylight as well. That figure is repeated so often that it can become flat, but in the shelter, it is not flat at all. 57 consecutive nights means 57 chances for a child to wake in a panic before the siren has even finished. 57 evenings of deciding whether to undress properly or sleep in clothes. 57 mornings of going above ground to see what the night had taken from other people. 57 times that the body begins to learn the order of sounds. Siren, movement, doors, stairs, crowd, guns, engines, blast, silence, talk, blast again. People who lived through raids became unwilling students of sound. They learned that anti-aircraft guns had a different weight from bombs. They learned that glass had its own kind of crash. They learned the flat slap of doors blown open, the dry fall of plaster, the patter of small debris, the sharp tinkling that could mean windows had gone somewhere above. They learned to distinguish, or believed they could distinguish, high explosive from incendiary, near from far, danger from rumour. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes the shelter acoustics lied to them. The aircraft are difficult to hear clearly from below, but when their engines come through, the shelter seems to shrink. The sound is not always loud at first. It can be a distant, layered droning, a vibration more than a noise, a mechanical swarm passing above the darkened city. The people underground know that somewhere up there, beyond the blackout, beyond the searchlights, beyond the anti-aircraft guns and the crews trying to locate targets, men in aircraft are looking down at London as a shape of darkness, fire, river and target markers. But the people in the shelter are not thinking in those broad terms. Not really. They are thinking in circles. This station, this street, this child, this ceiling, this minute. Civilian bombing compresses geography into the area around the body. A person may know that the East End, the docks, railways, power stations, factories and warehouses are all part of the war map, but fear reduces the map until it is only the space between the floor and the roof overhead. Is this enough? Is the wall strong enough? Are we deep enough? If the blast comes close, will the tiles hold? Will the stairs block? Will the air go? These are not questions anyone asks aloud, because asking them aloud would force others to live inside them too. So people sit and listen, and let their faces pretend to know less than their bodies do. Then the guns begin in earnest. The sound of anti-aircraft fire is not comforting in any simple way. It can reassure people because it means the city is answering back, but it also announces that the enemy is close enough to be engaged. The guns make the air above London feel crowded with intention, thud after thud after thud, sometimes steady, sometimes broken, sometimes so loud that each report seems to punch the shelter's air downward. Children cover their ears. Adults tell them not to be frightened while covering their own in a subtler way. A few people count the intervals between explosions, not because it helps, but because counting gives the mind a railing to hold. The father hears a man behind him say, "That's our lot giving it to them," and someone else says, "Hope they hit something tonight." And then another blast interrupts the small performance of confidence. This one is nearer. The floor trembles. Dust shakes loose from somewhere high. Not a cloud yet. Not enough to blind, but enough for people to see it in the dim light. Dust is one of those details that appears in nearly every honest account of bombing, because dust makes destruction intimate. Fire is spectacular from a distance. Smoke can belong to the city. But dust touches the face. Dust enters the mouth. Dust settles on blankets and eyelashes and sandwiches. Dust says that something solid has been disturbed. The youngest child tastes it and begins coughing. The mother wipes the child's mouth with a handkerchief, then realizes the handkerchief is not clean enough to help much, then uses the corner of her sleeve. Around them, other people do the same small things. Someone shakes dust from a hat. Someone covers a cup. Someone curses under his breath because dust has fallen into his tea. It sounds almost absurd being annoyed about tea while bombs are falling, but that is how human beings remain human. They defend small things: a clean cup, a dry blanket, a child's sleep, a place in the queue, a sandwich saved for later. The Blitz was not endured only through grand courage. It was endured through irritation, habit, stubbornness, and the refusal to let every ordinary preference be bombed out of existence. A woman may be afraid she will die and still be furious that someone has stepped on her pillow. Both feelings can exist in the same body at the same time, and in the shelter they often did. A louder explosion comes, and this time the shelter answers with a sound of its own. A collective intake of breath. Not a scream exactly, not yet. More like the whole crowd being struck inward. The lights flicker, or seem to. A baby stops crying for a second, shocked into silence, then starts again with a higher pitch. The old man beside the family grips the handle of his bag so tightly that his knuckles pale. The father reaches for the child's shoulder without looking. The mother's hand moves automatically to the youngest one's head and holds it against her coat. That gesture is older than war. Cover the head. Protect the face. Fold the small body into the larger one. It may not help against a direct hit, and somewhere in the mother's mind she knows that. But the hand still moves because a parent's body does not wait for engineering calculations. It does what it can. In many shelters, people were safer than they would have been in the open, or in rooms above ground. And tube stations in particular became refuges for enormous numbers of Londoners after the intensity of raids forced official acceptance of mass sheltering underground. But safety was always relative. That is, the word that belongs to this world again and again. Safer, not safe. Lower, not invulnerable. Sheltered, not removed from the war. Now the raid has its rhythm. A rhythm is not the same as predictability. It only feels like the night has developed a pattern because the human mind is desperate to find one. Engines above, guns, a pause, a blast, a smaller fall of something, murmuring, another blast. Someone asks whether that one was closer. Someone says it was not. Someone else says it was. A woman begins praying, at first silently, then with lips moving clearly enough that the child across from her notices. Prayer inside a shelter was not always formal. Some people said the Lord's Prayer. Some crossed themselves. Some who had not been to church in years found themselves speaking to God in the practical tone of a person, asking a favour from an old acquaintance. Keep us through this. Spare the children. Let it pass. Let it be somewhere else. That last prayer is the one no one likes to admit, but it is probably the most common prayer in any bombardment. Not here, not us, not this street. Let the terrible thing fall where I do not have to know the names. It is not noble exactly, but it is human, and shelters were full of human prayers. The little girl hears the woman praying and asks her mother what she's saying. The mother says, "She's saying her prayers." The girl asks whether they should say theirs. The mother hesitates. Perhaps they are a church-going family. Perhaps they are not. Perhaps they say grace sometimes. Perhaps not. But the shelter changes things. Many people discovered that prayer did not require certainty, only need. So the mother bends her head slightly, bringing her mouth close to the child's ear because the guns are too loud now, and says words simple enough for a frightened child to follow. She does not make it long. A long prayer would frighten the child more. A long prayer suggests there is much to fear. So she says enough. The older boy hears and pretends he does not. He is at an age where being comforted feels dangerous to pride, but he leans closer all the same. The father looks away, not because he disapproves, but because some tenderness is easier to allow when not watched directly. Another blast comes, far heavier, and the shelter lights go out for a moment. Or perhaps not completely out. Perhaps the dimness simply drops further and everyone feels it as darkness. A sound moves through the crowd that is close to panic this time. Someone says, "Steady!" A warden or shelter marshal calls out for people to stay where they are. The voice matters enormously. In a shelter, authority is often only as strong as the voice carrying it. The words themselves are plain. Stay calm. Keep away from the stairs. Do not move. But said firmly, at the right moment, they can stop fear from becoming motion. Motion is dangerous underground. A crowd that rises too quickly can injure itself. The later Bethnal Green disaster in March 1943, when 173 people died in a crush while entering a shelter, remains a grim reminder that panic, poor conditions, darkness, crowding, and sudden noise could turn the search for safety into catastrophe. The people in this shelter tonight do not know that future event, but they know the principle in their bones. Do not let everyone move at once. Do not let the stairs become a trap. Do not let fear get legs. A torch comes on, shaded and low, then another. The lights return or partly return and the shelter exhales. It is remarkable how quickly people can resume small actions after being frightened. The man with the cigarette relights it with shaking hands. A woman scolds a child for nearly knocking over a bag, and the sharpness of her tone is really leftover terror with nowhere else to go. Someone laughs, and this time it is not amusement, but release. The old man beside the family says, "Well, that woke us up, though no one had been asleep." The sentence is unnecessary and therefore useful. Ordinary speech repairs the air after fear has torn it. People make comments because silence after a blast can become too large. That was a big one. They're catching it tonight. Hope my roof's still there. Could do with another cup. Anyone got a match? Each sentence is small, but each one says the same hidden thing. We are still here. The dust thickens after the next impact. It drifts from cracks, ledges, pipework, perhaps from old dirt, shaken loose rather than fresh damage, but no one can know at once. Dust makes people look older. It sits in hair and on shoulders. It makes children blink. It turns dark coats grey along the folds. The mother checks the children's eyes. The father rubs his own with the heel of his hand and immediately regrets it because his hand is dirty. Far down the shelter, someone is coughing badly now. A warden asks if anyone is hurt. No answer at first. Then someone says a woman has fainted. Not injured, fainted. The information passes. Fainted. Not hurt, not hurt. The distinction matters. A faint can be dealt with. Injury means the raid has entered the shelter in a new way. People shift to let someone through. A first aid volunteer or a nurse or simply a woman who knows what to do moves along the row with a bag. The shelter watches without seeming to watch. In crowded places, privacy is performed by looking only halfway. The bombs do not fall evenly. That is another cruelty. A steady danger might be endured with steady nerves, but raids have gaps, and gaps let imagination bloom. The loudest blast is terrifying, but the minute after it can be worse because everyone waits to learn what it meant. Did something collapse? Will smoke come in? Will a warden run down from the entrance? Will stretchers appear? Will someone call for help from above? The shelter listens for the secondary sounds. Falling masonry, alarms, shouted orders, fire bells, the movement of emergency crews. London civil defence and emergency services were pushed into the front line once German bombing of British towns and cities began, with wardens, firefighters, rescue parties, first aid workers, and volunteers forming the human machinery that kept the city functioning under attack. But from inside the shelter, that machinery is mostly imagined. You hear fragments of it. A whistle, boots on stairs, a distant bell, a muffled shout. You know that above you people are working in smoke and broken glass while you sit in comparative safety, and that knowledge can produce guilt as well as gratitude. Some men in shelters found this especially hard if they were not on duty. To sit while others worked felt like a judgment, even when sitting was the sensible thing, even when they had children beside them. The father in our family may be thinking this. He may be too old for service, or in a reserved occupation, or home for the night after a shift, or simply a civilian whose duty at this moment is to keep his family together. Still, when a blast sounds close and a warden hurries past toward the stairs, he half rises. The mother catches the movement and says his name quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. He sits. There is nothing he can do. That is one of the hardest lessons of shelter life. Help has limits. Courage has limits. The right action is sometimes to remain still with a child pressed against your side. The older boy sees the almost rising and the sitting back down. He understands something from it, but not all of it. Later, perhaps, he will remember his father looking toward the stairs and staying where he was, and he may not know whether to call that restraint, fear, obedience, or love. It may be all of them. In another part of the shelter, people begin singing. Not loudly at first. A woman starts it, or a man with a good voice, or a group of teenagers who are frightened enough to need noise. Singing in shelters really happened, though not every night and not in every place, and it could be welcome or irritating depending on the song, the hour and the temperament of the listener. There is a danger in imagining the Blitz as endless cheerful sing-alongs under fire. That version is too neat. Many nights were miserable, cramped, smelly, cold, and frightening, with no music and little cheer. But sometimes people did sing because singing organises breath. It gives a crowd one rhythm. It turns many separate fears into one sound. The mother does not join in, but the little girl listens. The older boy mouths one line before catching himself. The father looks down at his hands. When the next blast comes, the singing falters, then returns, thinner but still there. That return is more important than the song itself. Then comes a silence that is not peaceful. The guns pause. The engines fade or are hidden by distance. No bombs fall for several minutes. The shelter does not relax. It becomes sharper. People who are speaking lower their voices without deciding to. This is the silence after impact, the silence that asks whether the raid has moved away or whether something worse is approaching. Silence in a shelter can be a physical thing. It sits on shoulders. It makes every cough too loud. It makes a dropped spoon feel like an offence. The mother can hear the little girl breathing through her nose. She can hear someone whispering a prayer again. She can hear a man's stomach growl and someone shifting on newspaper. She can hear water dripping somewhere, though she cannot tell where. In that silence, the shelter's smells return with full force. Damp concrete, dust, smoke carried in on clothes, the sourness of fear, the sweetness of tea, the stale wool of blankets. The raid has not made these things less noticeable, it has made them more intimate. A messenger or warden comes down from above, and the crowd turns toward him before he says a word. Information has entered the room. His coat is dusty. That is enough to change the shelter's pulse. He says something brief to another official, and people near enough try to hear. A street hit, perhaps? A fire. Nothing about this station. No need to move. Stay put. The words travel imperfectly, altering as they pass from mouth to mouth. Street's hit. Which street? Not ours. How do you know? He said not ours. He didn't say that. Rumour is not a failure of shelter life. It is one of its natural products. People trapped without information make information out of fragments, because the mind would rather hold a possibly wrong fact than an empty space. The mother listens for the name of their street and does not hear it. This is relief, but a guilty relief, because some other street has probably been named. The bombs have not disappeared just because they have fallen elsewhere. They have entered someone else's kitchen, someone else's bed, someone else's photograph on a mantelpiece. Another wave begins. The engines return, lower this time or seeming lower, because fear has sharpened them. The guns answer. A child screams before the next bomb falls, anticipating it, and the scream breaks something in the room. The mother of that child is mortified, which is unfair and completely understandable. She tries to quiet him, but fear cannot always be disciplined. The little girl in our family begins to cry too, not because she understands the new danger, but because terror is contagious among children. The mother pulls her close, and for a moment her face changes. All evening she is managed, arranged, rationed, instructed, comforted, corrected, and translated the war into words the children can bear. Now, briefly, she looks tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. The father sees it and opens the sandwich tin without being asked. He gives half a sandwich to the older boy, another piece to the little girl, and one to the mother. It is too early, perhaps. The mother had been saving them. But there are moments when the rule must give way to the need. Bread steadies the mouth. Chewing gives the body something to do besides tremble. The next explosion is close enough that the whole shelter seems to jump. Dust falls properly now. A light goes out. Someone screams. Somewhere glass breaks, though whether in the station, above it, or in a nearby passage no one can tell. The family ducks without deciding to duck. The father's arm goes over the children. The mother's head bends low. For 2 seconds there is no story, no history, no London, no war aims, no speeches, no maps. There is only impact, and the animal fact of bodies trying to live. Then comes the silence after it, deeper than before. No one speaks. Even the baby has stopped crying. The shelter waits for the second sound, because sometimes the second sound tells you what the first has done. A collapse, a shout, another blast, fire, running feet. Nothing comes at once, only dust, only breathing, only the faint settling of disturbed material overhead. In that silence, a man begins the Lord's Prayer in a low voice, and this time others join him. Not everyone. Some stare at the floor, some close their eyes, some may resent it, some may be grateful, but the words move through the shelter slowly, not as a sermon, not as a church service, but as a shared structure laid over fear. Give us this day, forgive us, deliver us. The prayer is old enough to hold many frightened rooms. When the words end, the raid has not ended. That is important. Prayer does not make the bombs stop. A sandwich does not make the shelter safe. A warden's calm voice does not strengthen the ceiling. But each of these things gives people one more way to remain themselves while the city above them is being struck. The family stays close together, faces dusty now, blanket half kicked loose, food tin open between them. Around them the shelter slowly starts making human sounds again. A cough, a whisper, a child asking whether it is over, someone saying not yet, someone asking for water, someone else saying they have a little. The guns resume above, farther off or nearer. No one can agree. The father wipes dust from the younger child's sleeve. The mother folds the blanket back over their knees. The older boy looks toward the stairs where wardens are moving with shaded lamps. And for the first time tonight, he does not want to be nearer the action. He wants the wall at his back, his family on both sides, and the all clear to come from somewhere beyond imagining. But the all clear is still a long way away, and the shelter has to make itself into a night home under bombardment, with children who must somehow sleep, adults who must somehow stay watchful, and strangers who must sit close enough to become part of one another's fear. After the worst of the nearest blasts, the shelter did not become calm. It became tired. That is a different condition, and in some ways it is harder to describe. Panic is sharp. It has edges. It can be seen in sudden movement, raised voices, hands grabbing for children, faces turned toward the stairs. Tired fear is quieter. It settles into the back, the neck, the eyes, the knees, folded too long under a blanket that is not quite large enough. It makes people speak in shorter sentences. It makes children cry without much force left in the crying. It makes adults stare at nothing while still listening to everything. The family has been underground long enough now that the first arrangement of bodies has begun to fail. The youngest child, who had cried after the last close explosion, has gone heavy in her mother's lap. Not asleep at first, only worn out, her face turned against the wool of the coat, one hand still holding the edge of the blanket. The older boy is sitting upright with the stubbornness of someone trying to prove he is not tired, but his head keeps dipping, then jerking back up. The father's arm aches from holding the children close during the heavy moments, and the mother's legs are beginning to lose feeling beneath the child's weight. Around them, the whole shelter has changed from a crowd into something that looks almost like a badly organised dormitory. Coats have become pillows, gas mask boxes have become footrests, suitcases have become boundaries, newspapers have been spread under blankets to keep the cold of the floor from rising straight into bones. People who arrived with their hats properly set now have them pulled down over their faces. Shoes have been loosened. Scarves have become blindfolds against the light. The shelter is still full of fear, but fear has had to make room for the body's older demands. Sleep, warmth, water, a place to put one's feet, a way to keep a child from waking. This is one of the truths of a long raid that can feel surprising from the safety of another century. People slept. Not everyone, not well, and not because they were unafraid. They slept because the human body cannot remain at the highest pitch of alarm forever. It gives out. It finds sleep in conditions that would seem impossible on an ordinary night. Children slept through gunfire because they had cried themselves empty. Men slept sitting up because they had worked a full day before the siren ever sounded. Women drifted for minutes at a time with one eye half open, because they had learned the old domestic skill of resting without surrendering responsibility. A shelter during the Blitz could be noisy, filthy, crowded and frightening. But after midnight, if the raid stretched on, it also became strangely full of sleeping faces. A child curled under a coat, cheek pressed to a mother's knee. A dock worker with his mouth open, head back against a tiled wall, exhausted beyond embarrassment. A young woman still holding knitting needles in both hands, the half-made sock resting in her lap. An elderly couple sitting shoulder to shoulder, both asleep, their hands joined under the blanket as if the habit of decades had followed them underground. The bombs might still fall, the guns might still sound, but sleep came anyway, not as peace, but as a kind of defeat the body was allowed to win. The mother does not properly sleep. She may close her eyes, but she remains aware of the child across her legs, the older boy beside her, the food tin by her foot, the father's breathing, the stranger shifting close by, the warden's movement near the stairs, the pattern of the guns above. This kind of watchfulness is not dramatic from the outside. No one would paint it. No one would write a headline about it. Yet it is one of the central labours of the shelter night. Mothers watched. Not only mothers, of course. Fathers watched. Grandparents watched. Older siblings watched. Neighbours watched one another. But mothers carried a particular kind of inventory in their minds. Which child had eaten? Which child had coughed too much? Which one was warm enough? Which one might need the lavatory? Whether the baby's bottle would last? Whether the blanket had slipped? Whether the little girl's fear would turn into fever by morning, because parents under stress notice every change and give it meaning. The woman in our family has been awake since early morning, perhaps since before dawn, and still her mind keeps working. She thinks of the house above. She thinks of whether the back window was properly latched. She thinks of the kettle left empty on the stove. She thinks of the neighbour who did not come down tonight. She thinks of the child's school satchel hanging behind the door. She thinks of laundry, ration books, rent, broken glass, milk deliveries, and the possibility that all of those ordinary worries may be replaced by a larger one before sunrise. That is how civilian war invades a mind. It does not remove everyday concerns. It piles danger on top of them until the mind must carry both. Nearby another mother is having a harder time. Her baby will not settle. The child cries in short bursts, then hiccups, then begins again with the furious disbelief of a baby who has been removed from a bed and brought into a room full of strangers, bad air, and sudden thunder. People nearby try to be patient. At first they look away with the public kindness reserved for someone struggling with a baby. After 15 minutes, patience thins. A man sighs. A woman mutters that some people should know how to quiet their own children. Someone else says, not loudly but clearly enough, that babies cannot read the regulations. A few people smile. The baby's mother looks near tears herself. The woman in our family reaches into her pocket and finds perhaps a small piece of cloth, or a boiled sweet for an older child, or simply a look of recognition. She cannot fix the crying. She can only make the other mother less alone inside it. That is often how shelter kindness worked. It did not solve the central problem. It reduced the shame around it. A shelter at night was full of these small negotiations. Space had to be renegotiated every time someone shifted. If one person lay down, another person lost room. If a child stretched out, someone's foot had nowhere to go. A man getting up for the lavatory had to step over blankets, bags, legs, and sleeping heads, apologising in whispers that became less apologetic each time his boot caught on something. When he returned, someone had moved into the gap he left. A quarrel could begin over 6 inches of floor. This sounds petty until you imagine spending 6 hours on concrete with your knees drawn up because another family has decided their child must lie flat. Then it stops sounding petty. The shelter's moral life was measured in inches. Generosity was an inch. Selfishness was an inch. A shared corner of blanket, a shifted suitcase, a pillow offered to an old woman, a child pulled closer to make room for a stranger. These were not grand acts, but they were the acts from which the night was made. The father eventually takes the younger child from the mother's lap, not because she asks, but because he can see that her legs have gone stiff. The transfer is careful. Moving a sleeping child in a shelter is like moving a cup filled to the rim. Too quick and everything spills. The girl stirs, whimpers once, then settles against her father's coat. Warmer there perhaps, or only differently uncomfortable. The mother uses the moment to straighten her knees, and pain moves through them in a sharp line. She breathes, out but does not complain. Across from her, the old man with the bag notices and shifts his own coat so she can stretch one foot a little farther. It is not a conversation. It is barely a gesture. But in a shelter where people notice everything because there is nowhere else to look, such gestures count. They become part of how strangers stop being only strangers. The raid above comes and goes in waves. Sometimes the noise grows fierce again, and every face lifts. Sometimes it moves farther off, and the shelter resumes its low human murmur. The guns speak from a distance. Engines pass, fade, return. A dull orange glow may be visible from the upper entrance if a warden opens a door. But most of the shelter cannot see the sky and must depend on reports. Fires are burning somewhere. Someone says the docks have caught again. Someone says no, it is the warehouses. Someone says a whole street has gone, then cannot name the street. A woman insists her sister lives near there and asks who told him. He says he heard it from a warden. Another person says wardens never tell you anything. Rumour travels in the shelter like a draft, felt by everyone and owned by no one. It makes people anxious, but it also gives them something to do with their fear. They compare fragments. They build maps out of sound. They locate danger, relocate it, argue over it, dismiss it, revive it. The mother listens for the name of their own road. Each time another district is named, she feels relief and immediately dislikes herself for it. But everyone in the shelter is doing the same private calculation. Not here, not ours. Please, not ours. War produces many emotions that people later prefer not to remember, and relief at another street's misfortune is one of them. As the night deepens, the shelter becomes more intimate in ways no one would have chosen. People who would not have spoken in daylight share information that belongs to the household. A woman explains that her husband is on night duty, and she hates bringing the children down alone. Another says her boy was evacuated and came back because he cried for home every night. Someone talks about a married son in the army. Someone else mentions a brother missing after Dunkirk and then falls silent, as if the word missing has taken up too much room. An older man tells a story from the last war, and though he has probably told it before, people let him tell it because memory is one of the few things he has brought down that does not add to the crowding. The shelter is not sentimental. There are still quarrels. There are still complaints about smell, noise, coughing, children, space, and people who think the rules are for someone else. But repetition creates familiarity. If you shelter beside the same person night after night, you begin to know the shape of their troubles. You know who brings tea, who forgets everything, who needs help on the stairs, who will share, who will hoard, who tells jokes too loudly because he is scared, who becomes quiet when the guns begin. This is not friendship in the easy sense. It is proximity turned into knowledge. The older boy wakes when a nearer blast shakes dust loose again. He sits up too quickly and knocks his head against his father's elbow. For a second, he looks younger than he would like to be. His mother reaches for him, but he pulls back slightly, embarrassed by the need for comfort. So she changes the gesture into something practical, brushing dust from his hair, that he can accept. He asks what time it is. This is a question many children ask during difficult nights, because time is a way of measuring how much fear remains. The father checks a watch if he can see it, or guesses if he cannot. Perhaps it is 1:30, perhaps 2. The answer is not satisfying. Morning is still far away. The boy asks if school will open if the raid goes on late. The question makes the adults near them smile in the dark, not because school is funny, but because the ordinary world has appeared again in the middle of the extraordinary one. And the answer, absurdly often, is yes. Schools might be damaged, delayed, disrupted, moved or thinned by evacuation, but the expectation that life would continue was strong. Children learned that war could happen at night and arithmetic could still be waiting in the morning. That was not always wise and not always fair, but it was part of the social discipline of wartime Britain. Carry on did not only mean speeches and posters. It meant a tired child being told to sleep now because tomorrow may still expect him. Down the shelter, someone produces cards. Not for a cheerful game exactly, more as a way to pass the time without letting the mind listen too closely. The players keep their voices low. A card slapped too sharply receives a look from someone trying to sleep. Another group shares a newspaper from the previous day, reading bits aloud. The news is already old, but old news is still structure. It reminds people that there is a world beyond the raid, a world of shipping losses, speeches, ration changes, factory production, weather, football scores perhaps, and notices about things that seem almost impossibly normal. A woman mends a sock under poor light. She holds it close to her face, needle moving slowly. There is something deeply telling in that image. Bombs above, dust in the air, children sleeping on concrete, and still a sock must be mended because tomorrow someone will need it. Domestic labour followed women underground. It followed them into stations, basements, shelters, evacuation lodgings, queues, and borrowed rooms. The war changed the setting, but it did not cancel the need to keep bodies clothed, fed, washed, soothed, and presentable enough to face another day. At some point, tea reaches them. Maybe the father goes to fetch it from a canteen if there is one, stepping carefully over limbs, waiting in a small queue under a sign, handing over coins, returning with tin mugs hot enough to hurt the fingers. Maybe a neighbour pours from a flask and shares a little. Maybe there is no tea at all tonight, and the thought of it is only a promise people mention to comfort themselves. But let us give them tea because many shelter nights did have it, and because the cup matters. The mother takes a sip first, only after making sure the children do not need it more. It is strong, oversweet, perhaps with condensed milk, or not enough milk, perhaps tasting faintly of the container it came from. It is not elegant tea, it is shelter tea. It warms the mouth and throat and gives the adult something to hold. The old man says it is terrible and drinks all of it. The father says he has had worse at work. The mother says nothing, but the heat in her hands is enough for a moment. A cup of tea in a bomb shelter was not a symbol to the people drinking it. It was a practical act of resistance to cold, thirst, shock, and the flattening effect of fear. It said, in the smallest possible way, the night has not taken everything. The little girl wakes enough to ask for a drink. The mother gives her a careful sip, then wipes the child's mouth with her thumb. The girl asks whether the house is still there. Not whether they are safe. Not whether the Germans are gone. The house. Children attach fear to what they can picture. Her bed. The cracked cup in the kitchen. The doll left under the chair. The step by the back door. The mother says she expects so. It is a careful answer, and perhaps too careful. The child hears something in it and asks again. The father says more firmly that they will see in the morning. That is not exactly comfort, but it has the shape of certainty. Morning becomes the place where answers live. Not now. Morning. The shelter depends on that idea. Morning will come. The all clear will sound. People will climb the stairs. They will go home if home is there. They will sweep glass, find breakfast, wash faces, report for work, count damage, compare stories, and begin again. Without that imagined morning, the long night below would be almost impossible to bear. Somewhere close, two strangers begin speaking as if they have known each other longer than they have. One has a son in the Navy. The other has a nephew in the RAF. They exchange the small official scraps families lived on. Last letter received, last leave granted, last rumour heard, last photograph shown. Around them, the shelter listens without admitting it. This is how community formed in the dark, not through speeches about unity, but through the sharing of personal facts at low volume. A woman mentions that she has a spare pair of socks for a child if anyone needs them. Someone else says they know a man who can patch a roof cheaply, if there is still a roof to patch. Another says the council office will tell people where to report damage. Practical knowledge moves through the shelter faster than official announcements. Which bakery reopened after last week's raid? Which street has water trouble? Which church hall is taking donations? Which school has been moved? Which family lost windows and needs help? This kind of information was the wiring of civilian survival. Governments issue instructions, but neighbours tell you where to find a bucket, a doctor, a ladder, a room, a coat, a person who knows what to do. The raid becomes heavy again after a quieter spell, and the shelter's half-community is tested. A loud explosion, not the closest of the night but close enough, shakes the wall and sends a child into hysterics. The mother of that child cannot calm him. She's exhausted, humiliated, frightened, and angry all at once. The boy screams that he wants to go home, and that sentence, repeated again and again, begins to wear on everyone because every person in the shelter wants the same thing and cannot have it. Before irritation can harden, the old man with the bag leans forward and tells the child, in a voice rough but kind, that he once heard a shell in France louder than that, and it did not get him. So this one certainly will not get a London boy with lungs like a factory whistle. The child pauses, offended into silence. A few people laugh. The mother covers her face for 1 second, not quite crying, then lowers her hand. The old man looks away so she does not have to thank him. This is shelter neighbourliness at its best. Awkward, unsentimental, perfectly timed. The mother in our family sees all of it and feels something in her chest loosen slightly. Not because the danger has lessened, but because the room has answered one child's fear without punishing it. That matters. In a shelter, a crowd can become cruel if exhaustion goes sour. It can also become protective if enough people decide, moment by moment, to keep one another from breaking. Strangers become neighbours not because they suddenly love each other, but because the same ceiling is over them and the same danger above it. A man shares matches. A woman watches another's sleeping child while she goes to the lavatory. Someone moves a suitcase to give an old person room. Someone tells a joke that is not funny but is needed. Someone knows a hymn. Someone knows a card game. Someone has a safety pin. Someone has news. Someone has a steady voice. Community in the shelter is not an emotion first. It is a set of acts. Hours pass this way, though they do not feel like hours while they are happening. They feel like fragments tied together by noise, a blast, a child sleeping, tea, dust, a rumour, a prayer, a laugh, another blast. The mother dozing and waking with a start, the father standing for a few minutes because his legs have cramped. The older boy asleep at last, chin against his chest, looking suddenly small. The little girl curled on the blanket with one shoe off because no one noticed when it slipped. The shelter light dull and yellow, the air thicker, the floor colder. The bodies closer than anyone would choose in daylight. Somewhere above, fire crews are working. Somewhere a house burns. Somewhere a person is being dug out. Somewhere a street is still untouched. Its blackout curtains holding behind dark glass. Its kettles and chairs and beds waiting in silence. The shelter cannot know which version of morning belongs to whom. Toward the deepest part of the night, conversations become softer. Even fear grows hoarse. The shelter begins to look less like a crowd and more like a field after bad weather. Bodies lying where they could, covered in uneven layers, faces turned away from light. A warden walks through carefully, stepping over feet with the practiced patience of someone who has done this many times. He checks the stairs, the exits, the lavatory queue, the first aid corner, the woman who fainted earlier, the family with the baby, the old man who has not moved in a while but is only sleeping. He is tired too. Everyone who holds order is tired. But the shelter continues because enough people keep doing their small duties badly, imperfectly, and persistently. The mother finally lets herself close her eyes for longer than a blink. She does not sleep deeply. She floats near sleep, listening from underneath it. The father has the younger child against his side. The older boy's head has slipped onto her shoulder. For a few minutes the family resembles rest. Around them the strangers of the evening are no longer quite strangers. The old man with the peppermints, the woman with the crying baby, the card players, the shelter marshal, the mother who made room, the man who complained and then shared a match, the child who screamed for home. All of them have been folded into the same night. None of this makes the raid noble. None of it makes the shelter good. It is still damp, crowded, stale, frightening and hard. But beneath London, under brick and concrete and earth, a temporary neighbourhood has formed from necessity. It breathes together. It startles together. It sleeps in pieces. It waits for the same sound. And then, sometime when the night has become so long that no one trusts clocks anymore, The guns begin to thin. Not stop, not at first. Only thin. The spaces between sounds widen. The engines are farther away, or perhaps gone, or perhaps everyone is too tired to hear them clearly. A few people wake because the quiet has changed. The mother opens her eyes. The father lifts his head. The shelter listens as carefully to the lessening of danger as it listened to danger itself. No one says it too soon. No one wants to tempt disappointment. The all clear has not sounded yet, and until it does, the night still owns them. But something in the shelter shifts. A man sits up and rubs his face. A woman begins gathering crumbs into a paper. The old man checks his bag. A child turns over and sighs. Above them, London is hidden behind smoke, dust, fires, broken glass, and the first pale suggestion of morning somewhere beyond the blackout. And below, the people who have spent the night as a crowded underground city begin to feel the pull of the stairs before anyone is allowed to climb them. The all clear did not sound like joy at first. That is one of the things worth understanding before we climb the stairs with them. To someone hearing it from a warm bed in a peaceful city, the all clear might seem like release, a simple signal that danger has passed and life may resume. But inside a crowded shelter after a long night below ground, the sound was more complicated than that. It came thinly at first, or seemed to, cutting through stale air, exhausted sleep, coughs, whispers, the scrape of shoes, and the low mutter of people who had been waiting so long that waiting had become the shape of their bodies. It told them the immediate raid was over. It did not tell them what had happened above. It did not tell them whether the street was passable, whether the house still stood, whether the windows were in, whether the neighbour who stayed behind had survived, whether water mains were broken, whether gas was leaking, whether the school would open, whether the shop at the corner had burned, whether the kettle left on the stove was still sitting there like an ordinary object in an ordinary room. The all clear was not an answer. It was permission to go look. At first, not everyone moves. Some people are too tired to respond quickly. A child sleeps through the signal entirely, face turned into a coat sleeve, mouth slightly open, one hand still closed around a gas mask strap. An old woman hears it and begins gathering her things slowly, as if speed belongs to younger bodies and safer mornings. A man wakes confused and asks if that was it. Someone tells him yes. Someone else says wait until the warden says we can go. The shelter, which had spent the night learning how to become still, now has to learn how to become a crowd again. Bodies unfold, knees crack, blankets are shaken, not too hard because dust rises at once. Newspapers are peeled from the floor. Bags are repacked badly because no one has the patience to fold things as carefully as they were folded the evening before. A mother searches under a bench for a missing shoe. A child insists he had a toy car. His father says leave it. The child says he cannot leave it. The father says sharply that there may be no house to take it back to, then immediately regrets saying it. The child goes quiet. Around them, other families are having their own versions of the same morning argument. Where is the bottle? Who has the ration books? Do not step there. Put your coat on. Hold your sister's hand. No, we're not having the sandwich now. Yes, you have to carry your own mask. Hurry up, but do not push. The mother in our family wakes fully only when she tries to stand. Her body objects before her mind is ready. Her back is stiff from the wall. One leg has gone numb from the child's weight. Her mouth tastes of dust and old tea. The little girl is half asleep and sour with confusion, which is often how children meet mornings after bad nights. She wants to be carried. The mother wants to carry her and cannot. The father lifts the child instead, not because he feels strong, but because one of them has to. The older boy rises too quickly, eager to prove that he's not like the little one, and nearly stumbles over the blanket. The mother catches his sleeve. He says he is fine. She lets him say it. There are moments when a child's pride is also a blanket, and a parent learns not to pull it away. Around them, the temporary neighbourhood begins to break apart. This is one of the most touching and strange things about shelter life. For hours, these people shared breath, fear, food, complaints, prayers, rumours, dust, and silence. They knew who cried, who snored, who helped, who complained, who had a son in the Navy, who carried peppermints, who lost a shoe, who fainted, who said the prayer, who sang, who made room when there was none. And now, with the all clear, many of them will become ordinary strangers again. The man who shared a match may never be seen in daylight. The woman whose baby cried half the night will hurry away embarrassed, though everyone knows the baby was not to blame. The old man with the bag may nod once, an entire farewell hidden in the movement of a chin. A shelter community was real, but it was also temporary. Morning pulled it apart because every person had a surface life to inspect. The warden or shelter marshal calls for order on the stairs. That instruction matters even now. Perhaps especially now. Fear going down is one kind of danger. Impatience going up is another. Everyone wants to know what has happened. Everyone wants air. Everyone wants their own street, their own door, their own damage, or their own relief. The line moves slowly toward the exit. Blankets bundled under arms. Children wedged between adults. Faces pale under dust. Hats crooked. Hair flattened from damp and sleep. The stairs that felt like a descent into safety hours earlier now feel like a climb into judgment. Each step brings back street smell. Cold air first, then smoke, wet brick, broken plaster, coal dust, a sour, burnt smell if incendiaries fell nearby. Sometimes the smell of gas, dangerous and unmistakable, would stop people or send wardens shouting instructions. London after a raid could smell like a city that had been opened, burned, soaked and shaken all at once. The first glimpse of daylight is rarely clean. It may not even be full daylight yet. It may be the grey before morning, the hour when forms are visible but colour has not returned properly. The sky may be pale behind smoke. Searchlights are off now, guns silent or nearly silent, but the city is not quiet. There are boots, engines, bells, voices, water hoses, whistles, the clatter of glass being swept, the sharp call of wardens, the rumble of rescue vehicles, the creak of carts, the occasional crash as weakened masonry gives way after surviving the night only in appearance. This is another thing to remember. A raid did not end when the bomb stopped. It changed phase. The danger became broken buildings, fires, unexploded bombs, gas leaks, live wires, flooded basements, blocked roads, weakened walls, and the terrible possibility of someone trapped beneath rubble, calling from a place no one could reach quickly enough. For those coming out of shelters, mourning was not simply return, it was assessment. The family reaches the top. The little girl lifts her head from her father's shoulder and looks around with the blunt honesty of a child who has not yet learned how to arrange her face for other people's feelings. The older boy is already scanning the street looking for damage before the adults can tell him not to. The mother looks first toward the direction of home. She does not want to look too quickly, as if the act of looking might force the answer into being. The father does the same, but pretends he is only checking the route. Around them, people pause at the exit despite instructions to keep moving. It is almost impossible not to pause. The city above has changed while they were underground, and each person needs 1 second to match memory against evidence. Perhaps the station entrance is intact. Perhaps a nearby shop front is gone. The metal shutter twisted, glass spread across the pavement like ice. Perhaps a water main has burst and the street shines under a shallow flow. Perhaps an upstairs room has been sliced open so that wallpaper, a bed frame and a picture still hanging crookedly are visible from outside. That was one of the most unsettling sights after bombing. The private room exposed. A bedroom with no wall. A kitchen cabinet hanging over empty space. A fireplace still attached to a chimney above a room that no longer exists. Objects survive in ways that feel almost insulting. A teacup unbroken beside a collapsed ceiling. A chair upright in a room open to the sky. Curtains moving in the morning air where a wall should be. People often looked at these things before they understood what they meant, because the mind resists putting domestic objects and destruction into the same picture. The mother sees smoke toward the main road. Not their road, perhaps. Near enough to matter, far enough to allow hope. Hope during a raid morning comes in selfish little measurements, and no one should be judged too quickly for that. One street over can feel like mercy. The corner shop damaged, but the house standing can feel like mercy. Windows gone, but roof on can feel like mercy. A chimney down, but family alive can feel like mercy. In peacetime, these would be disasters. After a raid, they become categories of survival. They start walking. The little girl wants to know why there is glass everywhere. The father says, "Mind where you step." The boy asks if that was where the bomb fell. The mother tells him not to stare, then finds herself staring. A rescue squad is working farther down, men moving with the purposeful quiet of those who know a crowd can become an obstacle. A hose lies across the road. A policeman waves people away from a building whose front has bowed outward. A warden stands near a rope line telling residents they cannot pass yet. This produces anger at once. A woman says her mother is in there. The warden says no one can go in until it is checked. The woman says he cannot stop her. Another person takes her arm. This is the kind of scene that repeated itself across bombed districts. Authority trying to prevent further deaths. Civilians desperate to reach homes. Relatives, pets, papers, money, medicine, photographs. The thousand small anchors of a life. In such moments, rules felt both necessary and cruel. Our family turns into their own street. The mother knows before she sees the house fully that it has survived, because the pattern of the roof line is still there. Not all of it, perhaps. A few tiles gone, a window broken, the front door marked by dust. But the house is there. The little girl says it is still standing, as if she has personally discovered a miracle. The mother does not answer at once. Relief can be so strong that it has to pass through the body before it becomes speech. The father lowers the child to the pavement and tells the older boy to stay back until they check for glass. His voice is practical because practical speech is safe. The mother looks at the upstairs window and sees the curtain hanging through broken glass. She thinks of the bed inside. She thinks of the child's doll under the chair. She thinks, absurdly, of the kettle. Then she thinks of the family 3 doors down whose house is not standing in the same way. Because on the same street there is damage that cannot be folded into relief. A house has taken the blast badly. The front windows are gone, the door is off its hinges, bricks lie across the pavement. Neighbours have gathered, not too close, because wardens keep them back, but close enough to make a human border around the wounded place. Someone says the family went to the shelter. Someone else says the old grandmother stayed behind. No one knows for certain. The mother hears this and feels the shelter night return in a different form. All those hours underground, all that waiting, all that fear, and still the final account is not evenly distributed. One family comes home to broken windows. Another comes home to no room at all. Another does not come home because the home is where the loss happened. That unevenness was one of the moral burdens of bombing. Survival could feel undeserved, not because anyone wished to die, but because the difference between your roof and your neighbour's rubble might be nothing more than the angle of a falling bomb. Inside their own house, the air is cold. The blackout curtains are still drawn, though one has torn loose. The floor crunches under glass near the window. Dust lies across the table, chairs, mantel, and the plate left. From the evening before, the house smells different, as if it has been frightened too. Plaster dust, smoke, cold hearth, damp air from the broken pane. The mother tells the children not to touch anything. The father checks the ceiling, then the fireplace, then the gas, then the back door. In many homes after raids, the first tasks were simple and urgent. Make sure nothing was burning, turn off gas if there was danger, check for structural damage, cover broken windows, sweep glass, salvage food, find water, confirm neighbours, report serious damage, and decide whether the house could be stayed in. There is no dramatic pause for processing. Processing comes later, if it comes at all. Morning requires work. The little girl finds her doll under the chair and begins crying again, not because the doll is damaged, but because it is not. Children cry at survivals as well as losses. The older boy picks up a small piece of shrapnel or twisted metal from near the doorstep before his father tells him to put it down. He wants to keep it. Many children did. Pieces of war became trophies, evidence, currency in playground stories. Adults saw danger and damage. Children also saw objects. That difference did not mean children were untouched. It meant they translated fear into things they could hold. The father takes the metal away and places it somewhere out of reach. The boy is offended. In a few hours, if school opens or if the street fills with other children, he will tell the story anyway. The mother begins sweeping glass. This is the image I want to stay with for a moment because it captures the morning after a raid more honestly than almost anything else. A woman who has spent the night in a bomb shelter, who has held a frightened child through explosions, who has breathed dust and stale air, who has climbed into a damaged city not knowing if her house survived, now stands in her own room with a broom. She sweeps glass from the floor so the children do not cut their feet. That is not a small act. It is civilization at floor level. It is the re-establishment of a home by means of a broom, a dustpan, and a body that has not slept enough. No one will put her name in a dispatch for it. No one will call it strategy. But without thousands of such acts, the city could not function. The Blitz was survived not only by fighter pilots, wardens, firefighters, rescue squads, nurses and anti-aircraft crews, though all of them mattered deeply. It was also survived by people sweeping glass, boiling water, queuing for bread, mending curtains, finding clean socks, calming children, sharing blankets, and making tea in rooms where the windows had been blown out. A neighbour comes to the door, not a formal visit. There is no time for that. She asks if they are all right. The mother says yes, then asks the same. The neighbour says they lost the back windows, but nothing worse. Both women understand the phrase, nothing worse. It means no one dead. It means the house is usable. It means the disaster is not the largest available disaster. They exchange information quickly. The corner took a hit. The grocer's roof is damaged. Mrs. Evans has gone to her sister's. The water may be off. There is a rest centre being opened at the school hall or church hall or municipal building for those bombed out. Someone has seen the milkman, or has not. Someone heard that the buses are delayed. Someone says the road by the station is blocked. This is the morning network beginning to repair itself. Before newspapers, before official bulletins, before complete information, neighbours made the first map of damage by talking in doorways. The father goes outside to help where he can, or to check on someone, or to report a hazard. Perhaps he joins other men moving debris from a doorway under the direction of a warden. Perhaps he carries water. Perhaps he simply stands for a moment with other men looking at the broken house down the street, all of them pretending they are evaluating the damage rather than feeling the narrowness of their own escape. Men were often expected to turn fear quickly into action. Sometimes this helped. Sometimes it only delayed the fear until later. He may be thinking of the shelter stairs, of the moment he almost rose during the raid, of sitting back down because the children needed him there. Now, with morning light on brick dust, action is finally available and he takes it. The children are given small tasks because idleness makes fear grow. The boy is told to carry unbroken things away from the window. The little girl is told to sit on a chair and keep her shoes on. She does not obey perfectly, but no one expects perfection now. Breakfast must be made if possible. This is another strange fact of raid mornings. People still needed breakfast. Perhaps there is bread. Perhaps tea if water and gas allow. Perhaps the kettle can finally be used. The first tea after a raid tastes of smoke, dust, relief and exhaustion. It may be drunk standing because chairs are covered with plaster. It may be shared with a neighbour. It may go cold while someone answers the door. But it matters. The body that has spent the night afraid still wakes hungry. A city cannot wait until it feels emotionally ready before boiling water. Beyond their street, London is beginning its wartime morning performance. Workers are heading to factories, offices, depots, hospitals, railways, and shops if they can get there. Some have slept in shelters, some have not slept at all. Buses are rerouted, roads are roped off, fire hoses snake across pavements. Shopkeepers sweep glass into the gutter and put up boards. A sign appears in a damaged window, perhaps saying open as usual, or more honestly, business as possible. Those signs were not only propaganda, they were stubborn, practical announcements. The shopkeeper needed income. The neighbourhood needed bread, tea, cigarettes, candles, bootlaces, soap and news. To open after a raid was not merely cheerful defiance, it was economic necessity, social service, and habit refusing to die. There is grief too, but grief does not always have room to behave as grief wants. A family whose house is destroyed may be directed to a rest centre, where they can receive temporary shelter, food, and help. They may arrive carrying almost nothing, faces grey not only with dust, but with the shock of being turned in one night from residents into people needing assistance. A child may still be in pyjamas under a coat. A woman may be holding a handbag because the hand had to hold something. Men may search rubble for documents, tools, photographs, money or bodies. Rescue workers may call for silence to listen for trapped people, and the street, which has been full of talk, may suddenly hold its breath. These moments belong to the morning after as much as sweeping and tea did. The city did not simply bounce back. It absorbed blows unevenly, with some people returning to routine while others entered the longest day of their lives. The mother hears later that the grandmother 3 doors down was found alive, or perhaps not. Since this is one family's mourning and not a fairy tale, let us be careful. Sometimes the news was good. Sometimes a person believed dead appeared at a relative's house because they had sheltered elsewhere. Sometimes a pet emerged from rubble and became the story everyone needed that day. Sometimes rescue crews pulled people out after hours and the street cheered, and sometimes the news was not good at all. The Blitz produced both kinds of mournings, often within the same few streets. People learned to hold relief and sorrow together because the alternative was to deny one of them. A woman could be grateful for her own children alive and still stand outside another house with her hand over her mouth. A man could joke while boarding a window and then go silent when a stretcher passed. The emotional life of the Blitz was not one mood. It was a crowded shelter of moods, all pressed together. By mid-morning, the children's faces are washed if there is water enough. Dust turns the basin grey. The mother tries to make them look normal, not because normal is true, but because children sometimes need the costume of normality to feel protected. The older boy may be sent to see whether school is open, or to carry a message to a relative. The little girl may finally fall asleep in the chair she was told not to leave, head tilted at an impossible angle. The father returns with news, more accurate now, or at least more detailed. A street name, a casualty rumour, a route blocked, a shelter damaged, a shop open, a warning to stay away from unexploded ordnance. The day is building itself from fragments. Inside the house, the broken window has been covered with board, cloth, or whatever can be found. The room is dim even in daylight. The mother looks at it and knows there will be another night. That is the hardest part of the morning after a raid. It is not only recovering from what happened, it is knowing that the siren may sound again. The blankets will need to be shaken and folded. The food tin refilled if anything remains to put in it. The gas masks kept by the door. The children persuaded that shelter is still necessary. The adults persuaded too, though they will not say it that way. The house has survived, but survival does not excuse it from being prepared to be abandoned again by evening. Home, during the Blitz, became a place you loved and repeatedly left in the dark. And yet, people did continue. Not as a slogan, not as a poster, as a series of small, tired, necessary actions. The street that looked stunned at dawn begins to produce sound, brooms, voices, hammering, a baby crying in an upstairs room, a kettle lid rattling, someone calling for a ladder, someone asking if anyone has spare cardboard, someone laughing too loudly at a joke about the Luftwaffe needing better aim, someone telling them not to say that because luck is not to be mocked. Smoke thins, dust settles. The sun, if it appears, lights broken glass with an almost indecent beauty. The city above ground resumes its argument with destruction. The family's shelter blanket is folded again, not as neatly as before. It smells of damp concrete, smoke, bodies, and the long night below. The mother considers airing it, then remembers it may be needed again before it is dry. The older boy asks if they have to go down tonight. The father says they will see. The mother says nothing because she already knows the answer if the siren sounds. The little girl sleeps through the question. Outside, men are still clearing debris. Somewhere church bells are silent because bells have their own wartime rules. Somewhere a train is delayed. Somewhere a shop opens with no windows. Somewhere a woman stands in a rest centre trying to remember what was in the drawer beside her bed. Somewhere a rescue worker hears tapping and everyone nearby stops breathing to listen. And in this small house, with dust still in the corners and morning light pressing around the boarded window, the family begins the ordinary work of the day after an extraordinary night, knowing that by evening the city may once again darken itself. The siren may rise over the roofs, and the stairs below London may fill with blankets, children, strangers, fear, and the stubborn human need to sit together until morning.